Do you remember what the Wi-Fi password is?
I do not know.
Albany cares.
Okay, thank you. My computer should remember it, but it keeps forgetting it. Thank you. All right, give me just a few more moments to make sure I'm all set up here. Do you want a few more minutes? Or you okay? Are you ready?
We're okay when you are.
Okay, everyone ready? All right. All right, I will call to order this meeting of the Albany Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, June 14th. And I will note that all the commissioners are present. And I'll read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. All right, that takes care of items 1 and 2 of the agenda. Item 3 is ex parte communications. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications that they need to disclose? I'm seeing head waves all around, and I have none to disclose either. So no ex parte communications to disclose. We'll move on to the consent calendar. Item 4, which consists of just the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes for May 10th, 2023. Are there any comments or corrections on this item?
No.
No, everyone's okay. Does any member of the public wish to speak on the meeting minutes for May 10th of 2023? If not, I will, no hands raised.
If people online on Zoom would like to address the commission on the consent calendar, which are minutes, please use the raise your hand function. And at the moment, I'm not seeing any hands raised for that item.
Okay, pretty non-controversial. All right, then I'll bring it back to the commission, and I'll do a roll call vote for approving the consent calendar. Commissioner Hudson?
Aye.
Commissioner McLeod?
Aye.
Commissioner Waddy?
Aye.
Commissioner Moman?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so that passes unanimously. So we're moving on to item 5, announcements and communications. Does any commissioner or does the staff have any announcements at this point?
Staff has no announcements. Thank you.
Okay. I'll make the announcement that I have heard that the Albany Twin Theater is going to close, unfortunately. And so that's bad news for the community. I have not, this is not confirmed yet, but it does seem to be passing along, going on social media. Any other announcements?
I have one. Our postal carrier was robbed on Tuesday, and all the mails that I was supposed to get is missing.
Oh, that's terrible news.
It's terrible. His truck was broken into and glass was splattered throughout, and all the mail was taken.
Wow.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any further announcements? Seeing none, I'll move on to item 6, labeled public comments. This is for any person wishing to address the commission on any items that are not on the agenda tonight. So any items not on the agenda, This would be the time for members of the public to speak to those items, to speak to whatever they want. Do we have any members of the public here wishing to speak on items not on the agenda? And do we have any hands raised in the virtual audience? This would be the time to raise your hand for items not on the agenda.
I'm not seeing any hands raised for virtual attendees.
Okay. So we have no public comments. I'll close that item and move on to the meat of the meeting, which is item 7, discussion and possible action. Our first item under 7 is 7.1, the encroachment permit application for outdoor dining parklet for 5 tacos and beers at 1175 Solano Avenue. Did staff want to make a presentation? Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to invite my colleague Justin Freed, the Transportation Sustainability Manager for the city, to address the commission on these first 3 applications.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll give a very brief background. This is relevant for the first 3 items on your agenda for the encroachment permit applications, and then dive into the first one here. So briefly, parklets were first established in June of 2020 when outdoor dining became a permitted activity under county public health orders. In September of last year, the parklet program regulations were adopted by council after discussion both at Planning and Zoning as well as Transportation Commission and Economic Development Committee on how to transition from that sort of emergency temporary provision from 2020. In December of last year, the Planning and Zoning reviewed pre-applications from current parklet users, businesses currently using parklets, and provided initial feedback and direction on which applications to bring back before you. And the permit applications were due in January, and since that time, staff has been working with business owners and coordinating amongst departments to prepare and review complete plans. Briefly, the regulations detail a range of items relevant for the parklets, the location and setbacks, platform and perimeter barriers, materials, accessibility, maintenance and fire safety, as well as signage and insurance. And it specifies that planning and zoning review should occur for parklets requesting 3 vehicle parking spaces, or for additional materials or other design questions that staff has that thinks the Planning and Zoning Commission should review. Key elements include the recommended platform to be level with the sidewalk and meet accessibility requirements, and also to provide access for public utilities. The other primary requirement is a perimeter that securely separates the parklet from vehicle travel and parking areas. Materials were specified to be of natural materials, including metal and wood, and that if other materials were proposed, they come before Planning and Zoning Commission. Plant material and lighting were also encouraged. So the pre-applications that were brought before the commission in December included one that only uses 1 parallel parking space, one that's currently just sidewalk use, and then the majority of them which use 2 and 3 vehicle parking spaces. And the 3 highlighted here are the ones that we're bringing before you tonight. And with that, I'll jump into item 7-1, the first one, which is 5 tacos and beers at 1175 Solano Avenue. It's east of Stanage on the north side of the street. It currently and proposed to use 2 vehicle parking spaces and currently uses a fair bit of the sidewalk and curb extension area, which is why it was requested to be brought back before the commission. So the revised plans submitted by the applicant address the issues that were identified as special conditions in the staff report. So These are revised plans that provide restoration of the direct sidewalk travel through the curb extension between the Stanage curb ramp there and the sidewalk continuing on to the east. The relocation of a bike rack that's currently within 5 feet of the fire hydrant, and restoration of a tree well and planting of a replacement tree. The materials proposed are primarily wood, plus there are some table umbrellas currently in use proposed to be continued, and plantings. And with that, the recommendation from staff is that the commission review and recommend staff approval of the encroachment park permit for the proposed outdoor dining parklet, subject to the attached conditions of approval. And we're available to answer questions.
Thank you for that. And do I have, and did I hear that, I see on the title on your card there is Transportation Manager, but did I hear Jeff introduce you with a different title, Sustainability?
I think I used the long title. Justin's managing both transportation and sustainability, so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And congratulations, maybe? All right. So are there any questions from members of the commission? Yes, Commissioner Hudson.
I have a general question about all the parklets, if that's okay. In the resolution of September 2022-101, there was a requirement that each of the parklets be in use for at least regular use, and if they're not in use for greater than 2 weeks, then there are questions to be monitored, or somebody needs to monitor. Also being properly maintained, and also clear of debris. I'm wondering who's doing that.
So we would address those elements that are more on the maintenance ongoing use as conditions of the encroachment permit. So they would be written as conditions of approval.
Could you speak up and say that again, please?
They would be conditions of the permit that would be issued for the encroachment permit. So
that's going forward, not past.
That's correct.
And so those, how would that be monitored, though? I'm just asking, who's monitoring that? I mean, there's a cost associated with that, so I'm wanting to know who's following that.
I can help with this. So if there appear to be some violations, you should direct them to Justin and myself. And depending exactly on the nature of it, we might bring in some of our colleagues. But in most cases, we would contact the restaurateur and ask them to address the problem.
Okay.
And you know, one of us in the community development department would do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Commissioner McLeod, any questions?
No.
Commissioner Moman? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about that relates particularly to this parklet. So my understanding is that during COVID pandemic, a lot of these parklets were quickly assembled with whatever material was available, and two of the parklets that we are reviewing today are significantly different from what currently they are. This one particular is not very different from the current condition, even though the plan periphery is different. It has been set back from the street line. So I wanted to know, and my understanding of, my impression of this parklet is also kind of not very permanent. Now, since we are going to approve these parklets for next 3 years, I am assuming that they are supposed to be permanent in their construction technique, and so and my understanding, my impression of this parklet is kind of not that permanent. It still has some kind of makeshift look. So I want to know, what is the intention? Would there be just minimal changes in the arrangement, or there would be much more robust reconstruction following same kind of aesthetics?
For this proposal, the primary new construction is the platform. So it currently goes down to street level, and they're proposing to construct the level platform level with the sidewalk. They are, it looks like, using a fair bit of the current perimeter, which includes the barrels, They're proposing for it to be alternating those barrels and planter for the perimeter wall.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Wadi, any questions? I have a couple of questions. Regarding the relocation of the bike rack, is that something that you're requiring the applicant to do, or the city is going to do?
We can work with them on that. I believe they relocated to the current location, and if there's feedback on what's proposed in the plans, we can take that under consideration about where it gets relocated to.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure I heard you right. So you're saying that the applicant had relocated one of the bike racks previously?
I believe so.
Oh, I see, okay. That answers that question. And in terms of the accessible path of travel, so that for the curb ramp up to the sidewalk, is that currently blocked by tables right now or something like that?
Currently, there are tables along the outside patio wall that predates the parklet, and so what's highlighted there as replacement of a tree rail has currently been is used as part of the path to access. So there are tables that push the traffic a little bit to the south.
Okay. All right. And is it, so can you remind me, are they being required to plant a tree in a tree well? Is that part of the
That's correct.
condition approval? Okay, great. I approve of that. I think that's it for my questions. Thank you.
I just have
yeah.
one question.
Commissioner McLeod.
In the past, I think they've been putting tables at the corner. Is that correct? I think they've been kind of using a lot more of the public space than would be allotted by the parklet. So is that prohibited, going to continue? I think there was a question about sight lines around the corner when they had people sitting at the corner. So is that explicitly prohibited?
That's not part of what is being permitted here. Yeah.
Not part of this application, but they shouldn't do it going forward. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I guess one letter, there were some complaints about the path of travel being too narrow, and they have the seating along the edge of the restaurant itself. And is that being pulled back a little bit, or it seems like there was a constricted area kind of at the edge of the parklet, between the parklet and the restaurant? So
Yeah, so the applicant is interested in keeping the two tables on the north end is what's left of what's currently there, has tables all along that wall, which is currently highlighted as the path east-west. So those tables would go away, and they're proposing to keep two in those two corners.
Okay.
That's what remains of outside of the parking area in the proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're done with questions from the commission. Let's see if there's any remarks from the public. Now would be the time for members of the public to comment on this application. So for members of the public who are here in person, please come to the microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening, and thank you. I'd just like to share with you that on my way to this meeting, I was driving down Solano Avenue looking for something to eat. Had not eaten. And what I discovered is there's very little parking on Solano Avenue. And I passed businesses that were open that could have supplied that need that, well, I couldn't park there. And so I kept going until I found an empty space by the pizza place, and my dinner tonight consists of one slice of pepperoni. I think that the parklets are having probably some deleterious effects on the businesses because the parking is so limited. And I think that to keep these businesses open, they do rely on people that come from outside this immediate area, like me. And this is something that I don't know if it's being considered fully or not, but I thought I'd bring it to your attention. I thank you very much for hearing me.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the audience here wanted to speak on this item? If you do, please come to the microphone.
Hello. As I walk down Solano, between Cornell and Stanage, we lost 7 parking spots due to parklets. Between Cornell and Keynes, or Cornell and Stanage, we lost 6 parking spots. Between Stanage and, or between Keynes and San Pablo, we lost 4 parking spots due to parklets. Albany was built 100 years ago when cars were a lot smaller and nobody anticipated the growth that we have. But to give up more parking spots for more parklets for restaurants means that people are going to be parking elsewhere and have to walk further. What about the other businesses that are losing these parking spots? So I'd like to put in a request that I could have a parklet for my business, specifically for parking, for my customers. Seeing we lost 18 parking spots in 3 blocks for restaurants, how can I be guaranteed service for my customers before everybody starts going to the plaza like they have been? So think seriously about this parklet situation. Yeah, I understand COVID was a tough deal to handle, but it's more or less over with. And are we going to keep putting the squeeze on other businesses? So restaurants who rented a place that is essentially too small for them to encroach on free space for other people for a mere penance of how much you're charging for a parklet? I don't know. I could put up that money. I'd like to have a parklet also. And I'm sure a lot of other businesses on Solano Avenue would like to have parking for their customers who don't own restaurants. So please reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the audience wanting to speak on this item? If not, I'll ask staff if there's any members of the public who have raised their hands in the Zoom.
I'm not seeing any hands raised yet. If anyone online would like to address the Commission on the 5 Tacos Parklet, please use the raise your hand function. Chair Pelch, I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, well then we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the commission for any comments about this project. Anyone? Commissioner Hudson.
I'm sure we all saw the letter from the woman who walks her dogs past the 5 Tacos and Beers, and she's having trouble negotiating through that area because other dogs who are belonging to the customers are not keeping their dog in check. And I went by that place today just to see what this passage is like on the sidewalk, and it looked like the most east table actually does encroach on passage. And also there's one by the fire hydrant that seems to also encroach on what would be a normal passageway for the public to go by. And I think her point maybe need to be considered, at least for arranging those tables if they're going to stay or if they're going to be incorporated into the parklet.
Thank you for referencing that email. I have not seen that one. I'm going to check my spam in case it went in there. Do you remember when you received that email?
Maybe 2 days ago.
2 days ago. Okay. I will take a look. Okay, thank you for that comment. I think, though, that what is under consideration is the application tonight and not the current conditions. So presumably, if there are current conditions that aren't in alignment with this application, that they'll change the conditions to match the application. So, yeah.
Just wanting to make comment for the person who did write in and take the time to do so.
Okay, thank
At least
you.
we mitigate that particular problem, maybe with the arrangement that's coming forward if we approve that.
Got it. Okay, thank you for doing that. All right, any other comments? this application? Commissioner
Yeah,
McLeod.
happy to make a few comments. Well, I think they are addressing the circulation issue by removing a section of tables that is on the north side of the sidewalk adjacent to the restaurant. So I think that's going to free up some space for people to go by. And maintaining that 4-foot clear path of travel is a condition of approval. And if they are not in conformance with that going forward, that would be a matter of complaint and then notification and compliance. And then if they are continuing not to be in compliance, I imagine there's some sort of sanction for that, possibly revocation of their permit or some other conditions. You know, I'm fine with it. It seems like they're reducing the numbers of seatings and tables out there. I do have one concern a little bit, which is that the current materials they're using, if they're reusing them, they do look a little bit run down. I think they need refurbishing or cleaning up. They need to be freshened up maybe. So I think that's important. Otherwise, I mean, the issue before us tonight is not the whole program of parklets. It's not to approve or disapprove of parklets in general. It is to approve the specific application and the other two. So this program was approved by council quite a while ago. We've had these discussions about parking. And we, as a city, have decided to continue with the parklets. So that's not really the issue tonight. I understand there's concerns about losing parking for other businesses, but I think the net positive of having these parklets and the animation and life on the streets, I think it's great. I think it presents a livelier street, much more animated area of our street. I think it brings people that want to participate in that kind of atmosphere to Albany. I think it's, sorry, it's not public comment type. There's plenty of parking. Objectively, we've done studies before, and there is enough parking. Parking has never been maxed out. So I'm happy to approve this parklet as is. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Wadi?
Sure, happy to chime in. I'll just second a lot of what Commissioner McLeod just noted, and just to reiterate, I completely understand that people have different sort of policy perspectives on the parklet program, but again, that ship has sailed. The city has adopted a parklet program, so that really the question before us is not about whether to approve the loss of 2 parking spaces, but more so to look at the aesthetics, the accessibility, the quality of the materials, et cetera. So it's not the space itself effectively that we're really talking about today, but it's sort of those qualitative components around that. So just to acknowledge the folks who are here completely understand policy perspective. That's just not the action that's before us tonight. That policy conversation, as Commissioner McLeod mentioned, has already happened. And on that note, I would just say I agree. I think overall, I don't have a general concern about the aesthetics and the general proposal, but it does look like it maybe could use a new life of freshening up, which I think is typical when people are using, wood material, unpainted wood materials. They do need to be maintained, they need to be stained, they need to be sealed, et cetera. And I would just comment particularly on this application. I feel Five Tacos and Beers has really become kind of a focal point and sort of a hub of civic life for Lower Solano. I think it's been a really wonderful addition to the community. It's always lively. There's always people milling about, and it's really wonderful. I know I go there very frequently with my family and my nieces and nephews on when they're over, and it's overall a very welcoming place. And what I would encourage them to do is, I know they've done a beautiful job with some of their landscaping, sort of more on the inbound side, right along the sidewalk, and they may want to consider, bringing some of those landscaping features to the parklet itself, which I think right now is a little more barren with just sort of the wood and the barrels and the umbrellas, just to add that extra touch. Because again, I think they've done a really nice job of sort of unique landscaping features elsewhere in their facility. But overall, I'm actually kind of bummed to see the sidewalk tables and chairs be reduced. I think there was something about the clustering and sort of intensity of use, if you will, that kind of made some intimacy, and it was always really lively, and I'm a little worried this can be a little more barren, and I'm not sure there's actually the need for that much circulation space for pedestrians, but I also get it if there are, rules that need to be followed with regard to not encroaching on that space. So I'm fine with that as well. So overall, I'm supportive of the application as proposed, and maybe would just add an encouragement for additional landscaping within the parklet itself, and again, a maintenance of the raw wood materials. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Momin, did you have any comments?
Sure, thank you. So I also agree with a lot of things that Commissioner McLeod talked about in general policy of the parklets, and the loss of parking is, I think, kind of a small price that we pay for improving the vitality of the street. We should also look at the walkability that is being improved by the parklets. That also would surely benefit some of the businesses where people can walk across your, walk in front of your businesses and, enter your stores and buy and stuff like that. So I'm sure there are benefits also. In terms of particular comments on this parklet, I think this is one of the most vibrant parklets along the whole stretch of San Pablo Avenue. I really like the ambience it has created with the use of colorful umbrellas and lots of plants and the colorful pennants and furniture. I am happy that the perimeter wall on the street side has now been pushed back a couple of feet. Currently it is really unsafe there because it is right next to a curb ramp, and it creates really a serious visibility issue when you're driving in that direction. You can't see a person waiting to cross the street. So it's a huge improvement that has been pushed back. I just have one really strong suggestion. I really don't know what is the big advantage of using the whiskey barrels as a construction material. That doesn't allow like seamless construction because of the geometry of the barrels, which is kind of bulging cylinder. It doesn't allow easy connections with the wall. And that kind of has given it kind of a makeshift look. So I would really suggest, strongly reconsider the use of the barrels, and maybe use some rectilinear element that would allow easy connections with the segments of the wall. And as Commissioner Wadi and Commissioner McLeod suggested, some revamp of the existing material would be really, great improvement for the overall, ambience character of the parklet. Otherwise, I support this parklet as proposed.
Okay, thank you. I'll just make my comments pretty brief because I can agree with what my other commissioners said. I agree that what's being discussed tonight are these applications and not the program, which we've already approved. It is a very popular place, and has, I think, is an asset for Albany and Albany's business community. It does seem that the business has previously pushed the boundaries by moving the bike rack and encroaching on space where they probably should have known they shouldn't have encroached on. So I'm glad that that's being clarified in the application, and that those issues will be corrected. I'm very happy that staff has pointed out or has required the replanting of the tree and the tree well as well. And I think that'll be an asset for the business and for Albany. So I also am in favor of the project. Any further comments by commissioners? Okay. Let me.
Happy to make a motion.
Oh, please.
Happy to make a motion to, and I guess we're making an approval here, not a recommendation to the Transportation Commission. Okay. I make a motion to approve item 7-1, the encroachment permit for 1175 Solano Avenue.
And do I have a second?
All second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And I do just want to say for the public that I was able to find that email that you referenced. Unfortunately, my spam filter is a little too aggressive and swallowed it up, but I was able to recover it. So we have a motion and a second. I'll poll the commission for a vote. And Commissioner Wadi?
Aye.
Commissioner Moman?
Yes.
Commissioner McLeod?
Aye.
Commissioner Hudson?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so that passes unanimously. So that is the approval for the 5 Tacos and Beers Parklet application. So we will move on to the next application for Parklet, which is the Luang, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Thai Cuisine application at 1166 Solano Avenue. Steph?
Thank you, Chair. This is a 3-space parklet proposal for 1166 Solano. This is the south side of the street west of Cornell. The proposal is for what it's currently using, 3 spaces. It's adjacent to parking on one side and to an alley on the west side. The proposal, the applicant did submit revised plans that addressed issues identified as special conditions in the staff report and were posted to the agenda. It includes the revision of the footprint to accommodate driveway egress, so that's why it's now trapezoidal looking, which is a change from the current conditions. The new proposal also eliminates the use of the stone siding. So the materials proposed are for wood railing. There's plexiglass windscreens on the ends and reclaimed corrugated metal roof with clear polycarbonate roof panels interspersed, and planter boxes at the corners of the parklet. Other than that, there weren't any other major issues to highlight in the report. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the encroachment permit, subject to the conditions of approval that were attached.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your report. Do I have questions from the commission? Commissioner Wadi? Anything? No? Moment? Commissioner Moment?
Yeah, I just have a question. So in the previous drawing, the applicant has shown some stone paver wall. Let me see if that is still part of, okay, so they have removed that? Okay, good, okay, that's what I wanted to know. That's it, sorry.
That's your only question? Okay. Commissioner McLeod, did you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay. Commissioner Hudson?
I'm just clarifying the barrels are going to go. Good, thank you.
Okay. There's more barrels in use. So I want to clarify, let me take a look at the staff report, which items were addressed in the updated application. So let's see, in the staff report, it says elimination, special conditions, elimination of stone siding and revised footprint to accommodate driveway visibility. So both of those are reflected in the new update?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. And then I have no further questions. So I will open public comment for this item. Is anyone wishing to speak on this particular application for Luang Parklet? Yes, please come to the microphone. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask a hypothetical question because I haven't seen the laws that you passed that enabled this type of activity. I'm wondering if that activity had any upper limit for the parking along Solano Avenue. In other words, does that program permit 100% utilization of all of the curb space on Solano Avenue? And if not, that would be the pertinence of questioning each of these applications, would be wondering where the limit is, where it has a detrimental effect on the business coming to the area. And it's on that basis that I spoke earlier and that I just wanted to raise that question right now.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any other members of the public wish to speak on this item who are in attendance here today? Seeing, oh, yeah, one more.
Yeah, I own a business on Solano, and I see the barrels, and I had a conversation with my insurance agent, and he was shaking his head, and he was wondering, he says, yeah, a car's weight average is about 4,000 pounds hitting one of these barrels. Imagine the damage it could do to somebody sitting there having something to eat. With the city allowing this to happen, now they're going to change the front, but all these other parklets, is the city going to be liable for any injury if a car happens to hit one of those parklets? I was just wondering. And if it's temporary, how long is this temporary going to last? Do they pay a fee that gets renewed every year for use of public space? I don't know if you want to answer that now or not, but I was just wondering. I didn't see anything mentioned about how long this temporary permit is going to be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And anyone else in the public wishing to comment on this item? In attendance or anyone online, Jeff?
Yes, we have one person who's raised their hand. Estrella Sainberg, please go ahead.
Hello, I hope you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I have my headphones on. Hi, my name is Estrella Sainberg. I think some valid questions have been brought up, and while I do really love the liveliness of Solano, and I think that brings overall benefits, I would just really love to see our leaders of the city and commissioners bring along all businesses. So if that traffic or parking report can literally be brought to every business possible, or there can be a presentation made about it, just so that we can bring the facts to people around about the parking situation, and then also how that factors in with that upper limit. Like, is the opportunity to have a parklet, is everyone going to get a chance? And was there someone that brought that invitation to every store along Solano, right? So I hope that makes sense. I'm just raising some equity questions and just a need, and then just an opportunity to make sure we move forward with this liveliness with all businesses that are currently there. We're not pushing people out because one day the customers can't access businesses. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have anyone else online who's got their hand raised?
Some others in the
I'm not seeing any other hands
Okay,
raised. Thank
no
you.
more hands online. I do see one more person in attendance who would like to speak on this item. Do we have a portable microphone? Thank you. 1 second, please.
Hi, I'm sorry, but your PA system doesn't work. I mean, for me, it was a little hard of hearing. I can't understand what you're saying. But I do want to make a comment about the parklets. If you have approved 2 of the parklets, I don't see why you wouldn't approve the 3rd parklet. I mean, it's all one and the same. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you for your comments. One moment, please. Okay, great. So there's no more hands raised on the Zoom, and no one else has raised a hand in the audience here, so I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for comments. Commissioner Wadi?
Sure, yeah. Maybe before sharing just my comments, just in response to some of the public comment, maybe either Justin or Jeff could, just to help sort of better educate the public who's listening today who may not have been around for the actual program, to just do a quick and dirty, what are the rules? What are the total amount of parking spaces or number of parklets per block that are allowed? Is the city indemnified? Should somebody be injured in a parklet? Like, just maybe a quick high level on that, just so that everyone has the same set of understanding of what this program is.
And fees, yeah.
I'll start, but I'll let Jeff jump in if he has additional items to add. On the parking side, so the several committees and commissions reviewed in developing this, and so there was a lot of discussion over whether to have a maximum. The counter to that was that in areas where there are a lot of parklets, there's more of a vibrancy and nexus, so there was some back and forth on that, and the decision was that there wouldn't be an outright cap. That was one of the options considered, but that requesting more than 2 spaces going up to the allowed 3 would require additional scrutiny here at Planning and Zoning Commission. So that was the balance that was struck, with the idea that we would revisit it. These are 3-year permits, so that we would revisit it after the first 3-year cycle and see if that needs to change.
I can add that we do require that the restaurateurs carry insurance and name the city as an additional insured, and recognize that there is a risk of vehicles crashing into things on roadways, and that exists with or without the parklets. We have vehicles going across sidewalks and into buildings in Albany from time to time as it stands, unfortunately. But we do have, there is an indemnification hold harm list given to the city, and the permittee, the restaurant, does carry an insurance policy that's approved by a risk manager. In terms of the fee, we did some calculations and proposed to the city council what we thought might be a reasonable fee to charge in recognition of the value of the use of this property, and the council decided that at least for this first 3-year period, they wouldn't charge that, but they would revisit that later on.
Great. Thank you, guys.
The city council discussed whether or not to charge a fee for the use of the parklets, and they decided not to charge a fee, at least for this first 3-year period.
Thanks, Jeff and Justin. And what I'll just add on to that, and I think especially just in terms of the 3 that are before us tonight, these 3 are not new parklets. These are parklets that are going from a temporary stage to the permanent stage, and we're focused, again, more here on design and accessibility now that we've seen them in a temporary capacity. Moving forward, obviously, we will see if somebody were to propose a new parklet, hypothetically, if Little Star wanted to come in, on the same block as another restaurant and take up those subsequent parking spaces, that would be a conversation that we would have about, that block face and, the balancing of parking versus the parklets, and that balance. So far, I don't believe, at least at none of the hearings I've been at, I don't believe we've seen any brand new ones. So all the ones that we've been seeing so far have all been ones that have been that have existed since the beginning of COVID. So I think we're still in that cohort, but I do think all of those are valid policy questions to be raised should new ones be proposed moving forward. So with that, I'll just comment specifically on this specific design application here. I think this is a dramatic improvement from the current state. I do feel like the current parklet is a little lackluster. Again, I know all these came up in a very hodgepodge way in the height of COVID, but I'm glad to see that this is getting upgraded to feel more permanent with higher quality materials and a solid sort of surround, if you will, rather than the barrels. I think we're all saying the same thing up here about the barrels, that we're glad to see those going away. So with that, I don't have any further design comments. I think this is in keeping with the adopted standards and recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding me that there were some questions from the audience that staff could answer, so I would meet.
I have one more question.
We had closed public comment.
It says temporary, but you're saying permanent. Can you clarify that for me?
We had closed the public comment, and I want to make sure that we follow protocols so that we have a productive meeting. But perhaps staff could just address this one question.
And I think he was referring to my comment. I'm happy to clarify what I meant by that. The parklets that we've seen right now came to be as part of the emergency order during COVID, when there basically weren't rules. We had not developed a parklet program. So we were kind of there wasn't clear guidance, and there was a lot of sort of hodgepodge materials pulled together to develop parklets. So that's what I mean by temporary in that sense. They were a temporary architectural design. These are moving forward. If we were to have anyone build something in an intentional way, we would not want somebody to develop them with random planters. We would want somebody to design them with a solid barrier. That's not what I meant by these are here forever. These are encroachment permits. They have 3-year permit terms, but they are more solid materials. I should have used that word instead of permanent versus temporary. The first batch were done under emergency order. These have more solid, proper materials to be living on our streets and sidewalks for the next 3 years. So that concludes my comments. Thanks. But again, public comment is over, and this is not a dialogue with the public at this point. This is commission deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, and Commissioner Moment, did you want to make any comments?
Yeah, I'm overall happy with the design and the layout. It is a thoughtful layout. It's a big improvement for sure from the existing condition. I like some of the features that they have provided, particularly the roof, transparent roof, which I think would... Sorry, I'm speaking to microphone.
Yeah, some of us are louder than others. I don't know if the AV people behind the curtains are able to do any adjustments, but yeah, those of us who are a little quieter, if we could get closer to the microphones, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so overall, I'm happy with the design. The details are good, and the furniture is nice. The previous package included some furniture items. Are those still valid in the updated package, or they have changed that?
They haven't provided any new furniture items.
No, the previous package had some furniture included, which some of them was good. So only comment I would have is I would recommend use of a lot of plants. They just have shown 2 planter boxes in the corners. But I think there is enough space, enough scope for use of more plant that I think adds a lot of value to the design, and also it creates a better environment.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Commissioner McLeod?
Yes, I think it's much simpler and more straightforward than before, and I think it's a good design. I don't have any problems with it. Going back to sort of the overall discussion, these are all still meant to be removable. They're not permanently fixed in place. And so at the end of the encroachment permit, it is possible they would be removed if the encroachment permit does not continue. So, and it was my understanding that council was also kind of going to review the whole program after 3 years. Was that it? And make adjustments?
That's correct.
So it's essentially another 3 years before council will review the entire program and maybe make adjustments or changes to it. So back to this project, I'm happy to approve it as is. It's, yeah, much simpler, much more straightforward, and I think it'll look very nice.
Thank you, Commissioner McLeod. Commissioner Hudson?
No comment.
No comments. I'll make my comments brief as well. I support the project, and although there is general concern about cars on the roads, traveling on that road. I'll note, as staff pointed out, that the only collisions I'm aware of is cars having jumped the sidewalk twice in Desari's Deli. So this is already a concern. I mean, this already happens. I don't think that the parklets make this any worse or any better. I will say that although my fellow commissioners have commented about the hodgepodge design of both Luang and Five Tacos and Beers, I find that I kind of like the haphazard design somewhat, and because they were solid materials, although certainly improvements are welcome too. I think some of the other parklets that we have are much more hodgepodge in their construction, so I'd be happy to see those upgraded. It is a significant investment for the businesses to build a more what looks like a more permanent structure, or what is a more solid structure. So I want to give them the benefit that they are, that it is a. I want to acknowledge that they do have that investment. They are making that investment, and I think one of the reasons why barrels was used, my understanding is that there was another business owner who had access to whiskey barrels or wine barrels, and for free, and that's why you see a number of them being used in the parklets. So, but anyway, yes, improvements to the design are welcome as well. And I think I already said that. That I approve of this project. So if there's no other comments, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'm happy to again. I'll make a
Mr. Waddy?
motion to approve item 7-2, the encroachment permit for 1166 Solano Avenue.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I will poll the commission. Commissioner Hudson?
Aye.
Commissioner McLeod?
Aye.
Commissioner Moman?
Yes.
Commissioner Waddy?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well, so that is unanimously approved. The parklet application at Luang at 1166 Solano. Okay, moving on to the next application, when we have one more encroachment permit application for the business Everest Kitchen at 1150 Solano Avenue. Staff?
Yes, so this third one is located on the south side of the street, west of Stanage Ave for Everest Kitchen. The parklet proposal is for 3 spaces, which is consistent with what is currently being used. Narrow alley is adjacent to the east. The layout is standard, meets the standard requirements for layout. It has the 2 feet setback on the driver's side from the adjacent space to the west, and it's maintaining 1 foot setback from the striped area. They could use that additional foot if they desire. It's just the driveway access to the east there. They're not proposing any new uses outside in the sidewalk realm. And they're proposing platform, a wood railing. The details identify optional corrugated roof, so unclear yet whether they intend to construct a roof. They have 1 dimension on the perimeter wall detail in the plans that's showing less than 3 feet in the current plan set, so that's the one special condition we identified that we've noted needs to clarify that they need to meet the minimum 3 feet perimeter wall. And that's the only special condition we've noted. So with that, the recommendation is to approve the encroachment permit for the proposed outdoor dining parklet, subject to the 1 special condition identified.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any questions from the commissioners?
No.
None over here, over this side. Commissioner Moman, nothing? Okay, and I just have the one question about the 3-foot height request. Is that because our ordinance requires the 3 feet, or is it for aesthetic or structural concerns?
It's in our regulation, so it's 36 to 42 inches, and the intention is really to make sure it's a secure perimeter between any of the vehicle space so that no one unintentionally is entering into unsafe area.
Okay, thank you for that. And so I think we've,
I have a question.
okay, go ahead. Commissioner Moman? Sorry.
McLeod? It was my recollection that the barriers were supposed to be 42 inches high, or that was changed?
It's 36 to 42, that range, and partly at the sidewalk end, you have a 6-inch, so it's also adjusting for where you're measuring from. But
So
36-inch minimum from the sidewalk realm. You step down, you're 42, but they're also, as you approach the center of the street, that's going to vary over the distance.
Well, my recollection of the barriers was that they were supposed to be equivalent to a deck guardrail in terms of lateral resistance and height above surface, which is 42 inches. So I think maybe we should check that.
That I think is applicable when the level changes.
I think both of you need to be closer to your microphone.
Oh, well, yeah, my understanding was it was supposed to be 42 inches above the platform where you're standing next to the street, similar to a deck guardrail, which is to prevent people from falling over the guardrail, essentially. So I mean, that was at least what I remember we
Yeah, what I
discussed.
know
If that
is-
was not the final approval, I'm not sure, but
Commissioner Moman?
And I think building code requires it to be 42 inches when the level change, between the two area, outside and inside, is more than 30 inches. So here, that would not be the level change, and so maybe that is the reason it is 36
well,
inches.
it was not that it was a fall hazard to a lower level. It was just falling over into the street, which is a hazardous space, which is what we were trying to prevent, which was
Okay.
what I recollect.
Well, all right, that's, anyone else have a recollection, including staff, on that one?
If you'd like the condition to be 42 inches, we could just make the condition 42 inches.
Well,
We had that range.
Well, I would recommend 42 inches for safety, because then it's equivalent to a deck where you're not really going to fall over and into the street. This is not to prevent cars from running into the structure, and it's not going to prevent cars, but it's to prevent people from falling or pushing it over into the street. So that's why
Sure.
there's the lateral resistance requirement. And for me, it would also be the fall requirement, or the falling over the railing requirement.
Okay, let's take that up when we come back for deliberations,
Okay.
if you don't mind. And then any final questions from the commission? If not, we'll open it up for public comment. Anyone from the audience like to speak on this item? This is the application for Everest Kitchen Parklet. I'm not seeing any hands raised in the audience here. Do we have any hands raised online?
We do. Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Peterson. I'm also a founding member of Albany Climate Action Coalition. One thing I want to mention, several people I haven't heard any mention of this, but I'd like to say, first of all, the parklets do another thing. As a bicycle rider, I used to avoid Solano with all the angle-in parking, the cars not really paying attention, backing out into you, being blind to sort of bikes coming along. It was pretty dangerous. But I find traffic in general slows down, even below the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit that is now on Solano, which is great. But I find traffic is more around 15 to 18 miles per hour, just because of the parklets making some sort of presence known, and people tend to slow down. I actually think that 15 miles per hour should be the speed limit through that area of Solano because of the conditions for cyclists and whatever. But anyway, I've found that they've been very helpful in reducing traffic speeding and making the street much more accommodating for folks on bikes and folks walking. I've also walked to the parklets. I live in Albany, and I'm pretty mindful of trying not to use my car to get everywhere. So I just want to make that statement that I see in all the parklets an advantage to people biking, making the street calmer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And do we have any more hands raised on Zoom?
No, I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you, staff. So if there's no other comments from the audience here, I'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission for deliberations. Would anyone like to go first? Commissioner Wadi?
Sure, happy to. Support this design as proposed to me. This is very similar of a design to the Luang one, so I don't really have anything to add, but I would be happy to make a motion unless anyone else has additional comments on this application.
Does anyone else have a comment from the commission? Commissioner McLeod? Oh, you did have your 42-inch preference.
Well, I just want to how is the regulation actually written? Is it for the guardrail height? It's, I mean, can we see it?
I can pull it up in a minute. To clarify, I believe during the discussions, the reference to the guardrail really was when we were talking about the lateral force discussion about how sturdy, but it sounds like it's also relevant for the height. Give me a minute while you're discussing.
Right. Well, the lateral force for a guardrail is 200 pounds per lineal foot. So that was also something we talked about. Well, in general, I'm happy with this. The guardrail is noted as 42 inches above the street, which would be approximately 36 inches above the inside platform, which is probably fine. I don't know. I think 42 would be more in line with a deck railing for a typical railing, and I thought that our goal was to keep people or even kids standing on chairs or whatever from tipping over or falling into the street. So.
Okay, well, while they're looking for that, let's see if any other members of the commission have comments. No?
I support as designed.
Okay, Commissioner Roman supports as designed. Commissioner Hudson has no comments, and I don't have any comments as well. I agree with what Commissioner Wadi has said about the project. I'm ready to approve it tonight as well. Were you able to find the language?
The language states 36 inches from base where people are standing and 42 inches from surface of the street. And above 42 inches, it's permitted if it's a permeable material.
Okay, I withdraw my comments.
With that, then I'll make a motion to approve item 7-3, the encroachment permit for 1150 Solano.
Do I have a second?
I can second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I'll mix it up a little and call on Commissioner McLeod first for your vote.
I vote yes.
Commissioner Moman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wadi,
Aye.
and Commissioner Hudson.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. So that's unanimously approved. Thank you to everyone who came to hear these items tonight. We're on to our fourth item under item 7, which has to do with changes to the transportation element of the general plan, or recommendations to the City Council about changes to the transportation element of the general plan and amendments to our zoning ordinances with regards to off-street parking requirements. So whenever staff is ready,
Just
please
give
go
us a
ahead.
moment here to settle in.
Please take your time.
as Jean is setting up, I'll briefly introduce her and ask her to present the staff report to you. Jean Eisberg is a consultant with Lexington Planning. She's principal of Lexington Planning. She's been working for the city for a number of years on a variety of projects. Most recently, before this particular task, the preparation of the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, which, as you well know, was completed last summer. The task that she's been working on recently, and this I believe will be your fourth discussion, is the implementation of Assembly Bill 2097, which significantly changed parking requirements in the state of California for cities like Albany that have major transit stops. So I'm going to turn this over for her presentation. Let me just share my screen.
Okay, good evening, Chair Pelch and members of the Commission. I'm Jean Eisberg with Lexington Planning, and we're talking about implementation of AB 2097. So just to recap, this Assembly bill was passed by the legislature last year and became effective in January of this year. And it eliminates parking requirements for most uses, most projects that are located within a half-mile of transit. And in Albany, that takes up most of the city. And so the exceptions to this are motels, hotels, and event centers in terms of uses. And so as Jeff mentioned, this is our fourth meeting, and during the course of the project, we received feedback from both the Commission and from public comment to consider implementation of this bill citywide because it covered so much of the city. At the last meeting, we had a straw poll, a little quick poll among the commissioners to look at a few specific issues, and so you'll see those issues and the results of that straw poll in the revised documents tonight, the revised zoning amendments and the revised general plan amendments. And so there's two parts to the action that's being asked of you tonight. First is to amend the general plan, the transportation element. This acknowledges changes in state law since the general plan was adopted. So this includes accessory dwelling unit legislation, includes this AB 2097 legislation. These red lines or amendments also reflect implementation that the city has done since the general plan was adopted. So this includes the voter approval of Measure D, additional ADU implementation on the city side, as well as some amendments that were made in 2018 to the commercial parking standards. And so lastly, since the last look at this in April, we made some minor edits and clarifications as requested by the Commission, including to have a little more of a legend of what was an amendment to the text versus an amendment to the policies or just a comment, as well as clarifying the passage of Measure D. In terms of the zoning ordinance amendments, those appear as red lines. You can tell from the screenshot. It's annotated to clarify why the change is being proposed. These are some of the key changes that are made. So first are to broaden the purpose statements. As it is, this section of the code reflects both parking requirements, vehicle parking requirements, as well as bicycle requirements. The city has taken a much broader approach in the general plan to think about transportation beyond just parking, but bike parking, access to transit, and so the purpose statements start to get into more of that multimodal effects as we talk about bike and parking. So key changes are to eliminate minimum parking requirements citywide, establish maximum parking requirements, and then to do some reorganization. So to distinguish between what applies citywide and where there are exceptions. The most notable exceptions are for the waterfront district. Changes to that district require voter approval, and so we've really separated out that section to just apply to the waterfront, and then, as I said, other standards that apply citywide. There are also some exceptions for the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, since there were some specific regulations that applied to that plan area. And then lastly, there are a number of changes to remove use permits or clauses or provisions that are no longer relevant once you remove minimum parking requirements. I wanted to highlight a few changes since the last discussion in April. First, to clarify that there's an existing limitation on paved areas for driveways. And so there was some concern about the potential to have large amounts of paved areas, and the code does currently limit paved areas for driveways. So we've retained that standard. Second, there's a use permit process to exceed maximums. So this proposal proposes to establish parking maximums, and then there's a discretionary use permit process where an applicant could come to the commission to request a use permit to exceed that maximum. And so that provides that option should an applicant want it to exceed the maximum. The last three are new provisions since the straw poll, and so this reflects some changes in requiring unbundled parking for rental units, not just in the specific plan area on San Pablo, but citywide, adding an objective transportation demand management, or TDM, measure citywide and not just in San Pablo Avenue, to require one transit pass per unit for all new projects, new residential projects. And then lastly, to allow a change of use, and this is most typically in a commercial use, to allow a change of use to continue without removing parking. So let's say you have a use that currently has parking that exceeds the maximum amount that this new ordinance would stipulate. If that commercial site wanted to change its use and on paper no longer met the maximum parking requirement, they would not need to remove parking. They could retain the parking that they already have and essentially be legally non-conforming. The ordinance includes a table that identifies residential parking standards. This table is organized by a few different categories of different types of residential uses. In all cases, the proposal is to have a minimum of 0 spaces for each use, and then the ordinance proposes to set a maximum. Key change since the April version of the ordinance is based on the straw poll. So we have for single-family units a maximum of 2 spaces per unit. For duplexes, a maximum of 1 space per unit. So that would mean 2 spaces for the whole duplex. And then for multifamily dwellings, a 0.5 space per unit maximum when you're within a half mile of BART, and then all other locations, 1 space per unit maximum. And this is aligned with the regional government ABAG MTC's recent transit-oriented communities policy. There's also a non-residential parking standard consolidated table in the draft ordinance, and this uses the blended rate strategy that's already in place on Solano and San Pablo and applies it citywide. And so again, here, as you have uses changing out, that this provides a blended rate, so there's not a whole list of specific commercial uses that have specific parking requirements. The staff report analyzes these proposed changes, and as you recall, when we had Patrick Siegman join us a couple meetings ago, he talked about many of these components of the analysis. So first, we don't expect a lot of change overnight. Existing uses, we do not expect to remove parking. New construction, we don't expect that everyone's suddenly going to not have any parking in proposed projects. Most likely we see incremental changes over time. There may be some projects that propose no parking or a small amount of parking, and projects that propose maybe close to the maximum. But we expect these changes to be incremental. We do expect that there will be an overall, this draft ordinance is less code. It's going to be less staff time on applicants requesting waivers and staff processing those and the commission reviewing those. We do expect if there is less parking provided in housing, we expect that to reduce the housing costs, especially as we think about the cost of podium and construction and structured parking. And so this can help increase housing affordability. And then by both the requirements to require a transit pass per unit, by reducing parking, it can encourage people to use alternate modes, walking, biking, using transit, and in that way can help support many of the city's general plan goals, the climate action and adaptation plan goals, and the active transportation goals. On the flip side, there's some concerns that the staff report analyzes and that we've talked about at previous meetings. So first, and you see this in the public comment tonight that I'll talk a little bit more about, there's some concerns about the potential loss of parking for new businesses, for business owners, and for workers. Second, there's concerns in the potential for on-street spillover parking. So if a new use is not providing parking on-site and that parking is happening on-street, that on-street parking could spill over into other neighborhoods, including residential neighborhoods. Third, we do believe that this means that there's going to be a need to manage on-street parking in different ways. And so in the next, as a next step, that the city may want to consider curb management strategies, including paid public parking, additional time limits on on-street parking, as well as residential permit parking. And so this could mean the potential need for additional parking enforcement and additional city staff time on enforcement. And then lastly, because of the removal of that waiver process and the application fees associated with it, we expect a loss of revenue for that parking exception fees. However, that's really offset by the reduction in staff time having to spend on processing those waivers. This slide summarizes the public comment to date. I'm going to focus a little bit on the first two comments, the first two bullets there, on the comments we received in the last few days. So overall, we've received a number of, and the majority have been in support of removing parking minimum ratios to support sustainability goals, to support multimodal transportation. However, we have received several concerns about the potential for spillover parking, as I mentioned, particularly from business owners or business managers. There's been some concerns about just the setting of parking maximums and what those maximums are. There has been support for the ordinance in that it improves equity between projects on San Pablo Avenue that currently don't have those parking minimum requirements and elsewhere in the city, and support for eliminating the fees for parking waivers that were typically granted. And then lastly, there was interest in the Transportation Committee review, interest in how this would affect electric vehicle parking, and a suggestion that ADA spaces should be required in new construction. So staff's recommendation is to consider two resolutions. The first is resolution recommending the City Council adopt amendments to the transportation element of the general plan, and the second to adopt amendments to the zoning ordinance to chapters 20.20 and 20.28. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there questions from commissioners? Commissioner Momin.
Yeah, I just have one question. I think we had discussed this in one of our previous meetings. I don't remember if there was any decision on that, but what is our...
Yeah, I think you need to be a little bit closer.
That's strange.
I've asked the gods of AV if they can help, but I'm not sure that they can.
Okay, so my question is regarding ADA accessible parking. Because the project, future project that would provide parking would be required to provide accessible parking also, a proportion of that. But the projects that would not provide any parking, how would we comply with accessibility for those projects?
So since it is a function of how many spaces are provided, it is conceivable that if a project does not provide any parking, then it does not provide any ADA parking. However, if it's providing some parking, then the first spaces are ADA spaces.
Right, so that's what I think we had discussed too, but then, then there would be no accessibility in some of those projects. So would we consider requiring loading, spaces at the sidewalk, at curb? Has that been discussed?
Right now, we don't have on-site loading requirements. We don't have on-site loading requirements for all different types of projects. There are certain loading requirements that get triggered depending on the size of the project or the amount of commercial space, but there's no substitute for residential per se.
Okay, so would we allow that?
I mean,
If, let's say, there is an affordable project, affordable housing projects with, let's say, 100 units with zero parking, would we not provide any accessible means to that? Because that would also be part of the, planning and even building permit approval. It has to be accessible. There has to be some accessibility, site accessibility, requirements that would have to be, provided. And that would mean that either, the project sponsor would have to, make some arrangement for that. And that would, I think, involve a loading bay at the curb.
Right, I mean,
with a curb ramp,
The project itself would still need to meet ADA requirements. So the project itself would still have, meet all of ADA accessibility requirements, have accessible units as required by the building code. It just may not have parking.
Okay. I'm not clear, in that sense. Like, if someone, gets off the car, at the curb, and if there is no curb ramp or a dedicated loading area, in front of that project, how can someone, get to the elevator inside? From the elevator up, the whole building would be accessible. But, from the sidewalk, from the curb to the elevator, how can a disabled person, go access that space?
Well, I think the reality is if you could have more accessible units, then you would have accessible parking spaces. As you're reducing the number of parking spaces total, you could have a disequilibrium between those two.
Is the question, I mean, the ADA, Americans for Disability Act, does not has many requirements, but one of them is not accessible parking. Is that correct?
It requires a percentage of the parking be accessible.
Only a percentage, so does not require that there be accessible parking.
Right.
I believe it's one space for every 25 parking spaces, if I remember correctly. There's a
Right,
table.
yeah, it depends on the funding and all that. So there is either 2% or 5% or even 10% if there are like TCAC requirements and
Right.
stuff like that. So, yeah, maybe there needs to be some clarity on that, yeah.
Right, and of course, not all people with disabilities are driving and using vehicles, and so there's many ways that people may access these buildings. But the buildings themselves still need to meet ADA requirements, even if there's no.
There's, of course, is a requirement, yeah.
Yeah. And the developer of the building can voluntarily provide more accessible parking spaces than what would be required by the building.
I'm only concerned, when there wouldn't be zero parking in a building. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, thank you for that, and we can have more discussion on that when it comes back for deliberation. Anyone else with a question? Commissioner Hudson?
I just have a question about the spillover of cars onto streets. At some point, the cars will be less, but meanwhile, we have possibility that there'll be more cars parked on the streets, and we'll probably have to give up street sweeping. Is that sort of in the cards, or what?
We would continue to do street sweeping on its regular schedule, so there would be days, as it is today, where people can't park on one side of the street once a month.
But it may be more difficult if we have more people parking on the
It could
street
be
because they don't have
you have to
off-site.
travel further to find a parking space, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, and our last meeting on May 10th, I did raise, it's in the meeting minutes, about the concerns that we do have an increasing chance of more people with disabilities, an aging population, families with multiple kids who have to go to different schools, and the inconvenience it will be if the people who live in these units won't have a place to park a car and get to and from easily, especially when it's raining. So I'm just bringing those up as ideas because it's fairly limiting, especially for some people who live in the community. And they may be a minority, but we do have to look after them. So Just a question for consideration.
Okay, thank you for that. Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you have the map that shows the area that would be subject to the state law for zero parking minimums? I think that would be very helpful to look at, because I think everyone needs to understand that state law removes parking minimums from about 80% of the city. So what?
I can pull that. Give me like 2 minutes.
Okay, but I think that'd be just very useful for everyone to see that we are conforming to state law by having zero parking minimums. I just want everybody to be clear about that. So if we could see that, that would be helpful.
Did you have any other questions?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Wadi?
Yeah, just a quick question for clarification for Jeannie. And I think you touched on this briefly, but just to make sure I'm clearly understanding this, for both residential and commercial, if there are existing single-family homes or duplexes or any type of housing that has existing off-street parking that's in excess of the maximums currently, and similarly for businesses, if they currently have parking that's in excess of these new maximums, will they be able to retain those?
Yes, and so that's something that's been added since April to make that clear. Existing, or even if a use changes, they could still retain that amount of parking, even if it's in excess of this new maximum that's proposed.
So really, these rules are for developers and folks who are wanting to do large construction projects, not for existing folks who are living in Albany and not planning on changing things up much in their homes or businesses.
Yes, that's right. So that's part of why we think this is really an incremental change, because it really is only going to get triggered when you have new development.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you for that. Were you able to find the map? Oh, great, thank you.
I'm ready to do that if you'd like me to.
Yeah, I think it'll go towards my comment as well, which is similar to Commissioner McLeod's.
So the area that's kind of a light yellow tan color, so it basically goes more or less from the freeway east. This is San Pablo Avenue, kind of where my cursor is going up and down. These are the BART tracks now so it goes beyond, it takes a little corner of Memorial Park. It gets almost to Marin School, almost to Santa Fe on the south side of the city. So within these areas today, by state law, we're not able to enforce any parking requirements, except for certain unique uses like hotels that we're not really dealing with. The only parking requirements we have are on the far right-hand side of the screen and the east side of the city.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was going to be my only question, and it was a question of clarification for anyone commenting tonight, is that state law says that in that yellow area, we cannot have any parking minimums. We cannot, in other words, we cannot have any parking requirements. So that is most of the city. That is state law. And great, that was my only question. And any other questions from commissioners?
No.
Okay, well, we'll open it up to public and public comment, and I just want to say, I probably should have said this before, but it's not required for members of the public, but if you are willing, it would be great to have you state your name and anything else relevant to your testimony, such as whether you're an Albany resident or a business owner. With that, I'll ask for hands from the audience here if anyone wanted to comment on this item. I see a couple of hands. Please come to the microphone. Okay. Thank you. There were two of you, so whoever wants to go first.
My name is Darla, Dr. Darla Totten. I've owned a home on Gayview Avenue for 30 years. My husband, 10 years even before that.
Can you speak up a little bit? Thank you. That helps.
Yes. Is this on? I have a cheerleader's booming voice. You can't hear me?
It's better now, thank you.
Don't get me angry. Well, this is just a specific question because I was trying to be cognizant about the Section 8 housing that is about to be constructed down on Cleveland Street, the bottom, and I live on the west side of the Albany Hill. And one of the conditions that many of us were very concerned about when that was approved was that there be parking. Now, the plans were approved in part because parking was part of the plan. And so they haven't really started actual construction. Are they going to not have parking there then? Because it's very hard to walk down our street. The cars are parked on the sidewalks. It's essentially a one-way street and then so you have to walk in the street. And as you all know, with the Teslas that we have, you could get run over. You don't hear the car coming. It's really impossible just to take a walk down to the Albany Hill. So my question is, even though the plan for the Section 8 housing included parking, because many of us insisted on that, are they going to renege on that now that there's this new law? Or should we have, if so, then I believe that the plan has to be revisited and go through a reapproval process. That's my specific question. And then there's just another 2 words that I would say just to keep in mind: catalytic converters. You know, if you have a garage, if you can't put your car in a safe place in 10 minutes, they can take your catalytic converter right off your car. So, something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you for your comments. Next, please.
Hello, I live in Albany. I own a business in Albany, been established here in Albany since 1964. And I guess your hands are tied this coming down from Sacramento, and it's really sad to see that our cute little city is going to be destroyed by this zero parking requirements, because as it is already really tough to find a place to park on my street. People are afraid to leave their homes because they won't get a place to park when they come back with this zero parking requirement. With the ADU units going in, more and more people are moving into Albany because you have to increase it by 20%. They're all parking somewhere. And it's going to get to a point where people are afraid to leave their homes, bringing their kids to school, because they won't have a place to park. Employees are coming to work. They're going to park in front of your home. It's a tough situation. I don't know where you guys live, but I don't know if you walked here or drove here. But if you go home after this meeting and there's no place to park unless you have off-street parking, but you don't need off-street parking anymore. So, I hear you got 12 units coming in on Solano and Ordway with zero off-street parking. I'm just glad I don't live on that street, because they're going to be parking where? On Solano. Wait, there's a parklet there. You can't park there either. So I don't know what would happen if Albany pushes back and says, no, we're not going to do this zero off-street parking requirement, and still ask that if you want to put in a second unit, ADU unit, that you require off-street parking for that. I'd appreciate it, and I think other people living in the city would appreciate that also. But I doubt you're going to do that, because Sacramento said it has to be. Now I feel for the Currys. Sold their house in Alamo, moved to Atherton, I think it is, $30 million, and next door is going up an apartment building. Nice.
Thank you for your comments. I see we have one more hand in the audience. We're bringing the microphone over to you.
Hi, I live in Albany. I live on Albany Hill facing the bay. And every day, 250,000 cars pass by my house. In Emeryville, 1 million pass by. Anything that brings more cars into our city and adds to the pollution, I am very much against. I'm against it for my health. I'm against it because of the frustration. All these things will take years off your life. And I'm just wondering, how much more can Albany take? And what good is all the development and the housing and everything if people are sick? And we're at the point now where people will be getting sick. And I just hope you take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, I don't see any more hands raised in the audience here. Do we have some hands online on Zoom?
Yes, so far we have 2 hands raised, well, now 3. First, Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this. Things are changing and we're looking to the future and the many future people that are going to be in Albany. And I fully support this. There are many sustainable alternatives in our dense urban city to driving a car. And these are to be prioritized and encouraged, requiring minimum parking amounts that continue outdated suburban planning goals on parity or near parity between cars and dwelling units has only resulted in more traffic, more cars, and a reduction in street safety while increasing pollution and global warming. I mean, yeah, it'll be great if everybody could bring their car here and have it, and we'd all drive cars all the time, and that's why we've gotten into this mess we're in now. Transportation emissions are the largest emissions that we put out there, and they need to be reduced. I agree with the previous speaker that we're killing the planet. We've got to change how we approach that. The other thing is that Albany right now, it's just free to park everywhere, free. And I know on my street, there's some people have 5, 6, 7 vehicles, and they're, they park them all over the place. And, I really applaud the city thinking about a parking management plan, because some of these cars that are just sitting out there forever and rarely used, or used for businesses, even though they're in residential zones, we need to thin that out. So if people really had to pay or somehow be responsible for the parking, people think with their pocketbook first, unfortunately. So, the other thing I'd like to say is, as someone who's lived in Albany for 30 years and is now well into my 60s and having, neurological issues that reduce my mobility, I still get around on a bicycle. I went to electric bike, and I find it's very appropriate. And you wear some rain gear when it rains, but it doesn't rain that much here. It did this last year. So anyway, this knee-jerk reaction that everybody needs a car, it's killing us. We need to move away from it. So I applaud this, and I recommend that you approve it. Thank you.
Did you have a comment in the audience about the volume of the online? Okay, if any AV people are able to increase the volume of the online comments a little bit, that would be appreciated. I will point out that we do have a transcription, a live transcription going on the bottom of the screen there. That might help for those who can read that. Okay, the next online commenter.
Yes, Harry Chomsky, please go ahead.
Good evening, Commission. Thank you for considering this, and I hope you will approve the changes to the parking regulations as proposed. The existing rules that are in the city's regulations were enacted at a time when we had a really different understanding of the value of land than we do today. I think we all know how incredibly valuable the parcels of land in Albany are in each square foot of land. And there are many uses you can put the land to, and car storage is one of them. And car storage is valuable, but it's often not the most valuable way to use a piece of land. And I think in an ideal world, we would have an arrangement where people who really want convenient parking or need convenient parking are able to pay the actual cost of using it. And we don't really have that world today. What we have instead is that the costs are pretty much spread across all of society. I think the changes that you're proposing, that the staff is proposing here, bring us a little bit closer, tiny step closer to the ideal world where people understand the cost of parking and pay the cost when they want to, and those who don't want to don't have to pay it. So I appreciate these changes and hope you approve them. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have another online speaker?
Yes, we have two more so far. Clay Larson, please go ahead.
Yeah, I listened to the consultant, and I heard again that the proposal that sometime in the future, we think more about curb management, that's a new term, and TDM. I heard the same thing when we did the general plan. I heard the same thing when we did the specific plan, but we never get to that point. And I think it's good to get to that point sooner rather than later. We have added language that refers to the TDM in the current zoning ordinance and refers to clipper cards. As I noted in my email, we never talk about the value of clipper cards. I mean, there needs to be sufficient value there to be a real financial incentive for people to use public transport. We never talk about that. So I hear that same statement made, and I see commissioners nodding their heads, feeling very comfortable that we're kicking the can down the road, but we're going to get to the point where we evaluate the impact of underdeveloped projects with less parking than's needed. But I think we should start talking about those solutions and see if there really are any. All right, thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Next online speaker.
Elaine Stelton, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. This is Elaine Stelton, and I'm an Albany business owner. I've noticed lately, since the bike lanes have gone in on Canes, and we have lost some parking on Canes, at my particular property, people are encroaching on the driveway, making it very difficult for residents to pull in and pull out of the driveway. And as I stated in the letter that I wrote to you all, a Uber food delivery person actually, tried to pull into my building because he couldn't find parking on San Pablo at the Chinese restaurant. So he pulled in illegally and actually was in such a rush to get out with the Chinese food that he hit my building several times. And with regard to how many times buildings do get hit in Albany, the police officer who came out, whose name is Mark Strackle, I guess he's officer number 13. No, excuse me, it's case number 100, but he's officer number 13, said buildings actually get hit. They get calls about 20 times a month in Albany. So I don't know if that's related to parking. I did not have that discussion with the officer. I was just discussing my building being hit by a delivery person. So with regard to Commissioner Momin's comment on loading, I think it would be really nice to have some loading areas, particularly maybe near restaurants now that so many people are having food delivered, maybe 10-minute parking in certain locations, maybe parking enforcement later into the evening. So if people are blocking driveways or people are, somehow impinging on other people's ability to function, it would be nice to have maybe parking enforcement go later into the evening. And I also think that some sort of curb management, like having red painted near driveways, just so people know that they're encroaching on driveways, would be very useful for the city to do. Thank you so very much for considering these matters. I appreciate it very much. Good evening.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any more online speakers?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay, thank you for that. One moment. Okay, that seems to conclude public comment, and so I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberations. Would anyone like to start with commentary or discussion on this issue? Don't all rush at once. Commissioner McLeod, please go ahead.
Yeah, happy to start off. You know, as we noted or saw on the map, that about 75% of the city is under state jurisdiction for no parking minimums. And so a big part of what we're doing is extending those zero parking minimums to the rest of the city in terms of equity, so that we don't have side-by-side houses or neighborhoods that have different standards, or even on the same block, adjacent houses having different standards. So it's trying to create a uniform parking policy for the whole city and extending that state zero parking minimum to the whole city. And it's not a zero parking requirement. That sounds like you're not allowed to have parking. It's that you're not required to have a minimum amount of parking, and it's still voluntary to have more parking if you want. And the other side of the question we're talking about tonight is a parking maximum. And I think in most cases it's quite reasonable, what we've been discussing. You know, I think it's, like we've said, it furthers our transit goals, it furthers our climate action goals. I think it's a better use of space for housing. It makes housing cheaper. It also is an opportunity to create more housing instead of a parking area. So it's a better utilization of space and getting housing instead of car storage. I think it will actually reduce the number of cars in Albany over time. I think the corollary to this is something like what one commenter said: we need solutions. TDMs are one. We're extending. We're not changing our TDM requirements. We are just extending them across the city. So I think we could revisit our TDM requirements and make them more robust with actual values for the Clipper cards, or other requirements for car share, or other transit-oriented improvements. So it's not just that we're trying to reduce parking, but I think we need to increase our other multimodal transportation elements. That's including buses, bike lanes, basically a mode shift away from car use. What we're really trying to do is create a new paradigm. You know, given climate change, given the climate crisis we're in, really, I think business as usual is no longer valid, and I think we need to rethink how we've been doing things. These parking requirements have basically been in place since the 1950s, 40s and 50s, and it's really time that we move away from how we've been doing things for the last half century or more and try to create a new, better Albany, and that is really trying to create a walkable, livable city that is greener. I've been in cities that have more bikes than cars, and it's a much better experience. It's quieter, it's safer for everybody. You know, for me, that's the goal. We get to a more green, more ecological, more environmental city that's safer and better to live in. And I think changing these parking requirements is one step in that direction. So I'm completely for what we've proposed so far after 4 meetings. I would also note that Berkeley has a 0.5 parking maximum near transit stops, and they've had that for a couple of years. And contrary to what some letters have suggested, I don't think that's discouraging housing development in Berkeley. I think it has not really had an effect from what I've seen. I think there's more housing development going on than ever before, so I don't think there's a real danger for having a parking maximum of 0.5 within half mile of a major transit stop, which is BART. So, you know, I would have gone further. I would have extended the 0.5 maximum to the entire city. Again, so we don't have side-by-side differences, and much more consistent policy citywide, but so far the support has been for 0.5 maximum within a half mile of the BART station. So I'm happy with that. I think it's a great start. So I'm 100% for what we've come up with, is this set of proposals, and I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We've closed public comment at this point. We don't generally have a dialogue. Apologies for that. Commissioner Moment or Wadi, either one. Go ahead, Commissioner Moment.
Thank you. I would like to thank planning staff and the planning consultants for putting together this ordinance over last couple of months and incorporating a lot of comments from the public and the commissioners. I think with this new ordinance, in addition to complying with the new state law, I think we are achieving a lot of goals that Commissioner McLeod just mentioned, including reducing the dependence on the automobile, reducing the emissions, and lots of other things. The important thing that we have done, is just like, in simple language, we have converted the minimum into maximum. Typically, from my experience as an architect, people, just comply with the minimum. There are very few cases where people would provide more parking than required. So if we are keeping the, we are, keeping that maximum as minimum required, and there would not be a huge impact. Where it would benefit is where, that there is not really much need for parking, like transit-rich areas where there are lots of alternate transit modes available, and when projects are forced to provide parking, that affects a lot of things, including affordability. So I think that's where this ordinance would really help. So overall, I'm really happy with the progress we have made so far, and I agree with all of the provisions in this new ordinance, and I support it as proposed.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Moment. Commissioner Wadi.
Sure, just a few additional things to say. Very much agree with most of what Commissioner McLeod and Commissioner Moment just said, and I know don't want to repeat myself of what I've said over the last, I think, 3 or 4 hearings. I feel like this might be our 3rd hearing. So I'll try to keep it brief. Firstly, I'm very supportive of us including the portions of our geography here in Albany that are outside of the boundary that the state has mandated. I think it's a relatively small portion of our city. And I'll just say, as somebody who implements zoning codes for their day job, it makes things really, really complicated. And I think it does a big disservice to the community when things that seem the same have different rules. So, if your friend's house 2 blocks away are doing a remodel and they have a parking requirement, and then you go to do a remodel that's very similar and you don't have a parking requirement, it's really confusing. And I just don't think that is terribly good government. I understand there are other policy implications, but I do think there is a value in just the simplicity of rules for the same kinds of things. So I'll just start off on that side. Secondly, I am really glad to see the amendments that really clarify for everyone that no one is making existing homeowners, landlords, or business owners make changes to what they have. If you have parking that deviates from these rules, you get to keep it. And I think that's really important in terms of this incremental change. People, sometimes this is their life's investment, or they've lived in their home for decades and decades and are aging in their home in Albany, which I actually think, one of the big benefits of Albany is it is a community that you can age in place. And so I think it's important to be able to let people keep what they're accustomed to. So to me, really, this is a ordinance targeted at developers. And again, quite familiar with the development community and what a lot of their sort of needs are as they're building housing and what they're asking for. And one thing I can guarantee you is that developers are very in tune with what the market wants. And if we get to a place in Albany where the parking is difficult, developers aren't going to build 0 parking projects. They're going to build projects with parking. They're not really concerned about policy. They're meeting the market demand. They want their units to be the most desirable that will sell at the highest rates compared to other apartment buildings. And so I do think there is an element here where the market will tell us what it needs, and developers will include parking to meet market demand. So far, what I've often seen is that they over-anticipate the demand for parking and they end up building a building with a lot of surplus parking, and later come back trying to figure out what to do with that surplus parking. And that becomes a pretty expensive venture. later on. So to me, that's really the question that we're broached with today is, do we let developers identify what their market building is, whether that's an affordable project, whether that's a high-end luxury product? They're going to have different anticipated market demands for parking. And we're letting developers tell us what they think the market needs based on their very, very in-depth market research on a project-by-project basis. And I'm comfortable with that. And one of the reasons, sort of to my third and last point, that I'm comfortable with that, which I've been dealing with this a lot lately, these are ordinances that we're passing. And as much as these are difficult decisions that we're making, and it's based on a lot of research that we think are the right decisions, we can change the rules today. And if we got it wrong, we can change the rules back. It's sort of the beauty of the democratic process here is we're taking some presumptions of how our policy decisions will play out in the built environment. And we do sometimes get them wrong. And there are ways that we can change that. And so I think, what's really important is that we continue to hear from the community as, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years go on to hear from folks about the changes that they're experiencing. Because I know we hear, somebody who's been in the planning profession for pushing 20 years now, you hear a lot of the world is falling. This is going to, it's going to kill our community or kill our city. And you don't often hear of people coming back 5 years later to say, I was kind of wrong on that. This actually worked out. But a lot of times it does work out and it's okay. And there's a lot of fear for change, and I understand that. But I think it's also the type of thing where sometimes you have to make some judgment decisions here based on data and based on some analyses. And I think if we get to a point where we can recognize we made a wrong decision, we can make some changes. I don't think that's what we're doing here today, but I just want folks to know this doesn't mean that we can never change things back. We can have another conversation to change things back if we get this wrong. So I think for right now, I'm very confident that we're not getting things wrong and that we're moving in the right direction. But just sort of ending on that point that this is always a work in progress, and we should always be reflecting on our rules and be open to making changes. So with that, I'm supportive of the package with the revisions that you presented this evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Waddy. Commissioner Hudson, did you have any comments?
I do. I know that from the housing element, which I was introduced to in February when I joined the commission, we have to add 1,114 new units over the next 8 years in the city of Albany. So that's new construction. And so these requirements are that we're seeing and hearing today apply to new construction. And I appreciate Commissioner Waddy's bringing that up, as whatever we have now stays the way it is if we want it. That said, though, and I understand too that we are improving our land use by not using it for parking if we don't have to. But that also relies upon an infrastructure of transportation, which right now may not be adequate, especially since every 20 minutes is not frequent enough, or every 15 minutes is not frequent enough on San Pablo or Solano Avenue. And certainly if people work at night, it's not going to meet their needs. So that's another thing to consider. But I also appreciate the reducing of car traffic and finding alternatives. And we have a small enough city that can work, and it can also allow for the feeding and support of businesses, which took a huge hit during COVID. And we're hoping that they can rebuild. And we have a lot of empty storefronts now along Solano, and hopefully people will want to be there. But there has to be the parking, because we do attract a large number of people coming into the area. Not just local businesses rely on local traffic. It relies on people coming from outside. So, I appreciate the direction. It's a lot of work that you guys have put together into making this transportation element and the parking resolutions conform to what the state is required for this assembly bill. So I'm in favor of it. I just hope, as you say, that we have the opportunity to re-examine it along the way, particularly if the infrastructure of the public transportation doesn't meet the needs of the people who are living within that half mile of transportation and are struggling to get where they need to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, I have a number of comments. And maybe in the spirit of we can always change this later, I do have some suggestions for changes, but it might not be the appropriate moment to try to do this at the dais, but I will speak to some of these changes in a bit. Thank you. I also thank you for your work on this, staff and consultant, and I do agree we can make refinements later. I just wanted to make one clarification to start out with about the affordable housing project on Cleveland Avenue. It is not, I wouldn't call it Section 8 housing. It's affordable housing. Construction actually has started, and I do believe that project has 1 parking space per unit. Yeah, okay, just to clarify that for the public. I do, let's see, I do want to make one of the members of the public spoke about TDM and curb management. I do think that's an appropriate comment. I think some streets in our city are more impacted than others. So I know that along Solano Avenue, the side streets along Solano Avenue are usually more impacted from people parking there, and the streets closer to San Pablo, such as Adams and Keynes, usually have much more parking than some of the other streets in the city. So I just want to acknowledge that not all streets are the same. I know there are some streets in the city where it's typically never a problem to find a parking space, city-provided curbs parking space. So I don't know when is the right time to think about TDM and curb management, but it might come sooner than later. We shouldn't just, I don't mean, when I talk about that, I don't mean to just say it as, to make that comment so that we can brush aside all concerns. I do think that we will have to have residential parking permits or metered parking at some point in the future in order to manage our parking. This is what cities typically do to manage their parking. In terms of peoples with disabilities, we did hear that ADA does not require that we provide disabled spaces if we're not requiring any parking. You know, that said, I think it is something for us to consider whether we want to require loading zones or ADA spaces for projects. I don't know what the state of the art for this is, but it seems like at least a loading zone for people might be appropriate. I know that, as was mentioned, not everyone who is disabled uses a car. Many, I certainly know of people in the city who don't use a car, but they do need accessible facilities because they're in a wheelchair, for example. And so we shouldn't assume that someone with a disability will always need to have a car parking space, but there are regional transit services that support those with disabilities and that might need a loading area to load and unload a person in front of a project that has no parking. So I think we should consider that. I also heard a comment about parking enforcement later in the evening. Yeah, I think that that's appropriate as well. It's kind of funny that in business districts, parking enforcement often stops at the end of the business day, yet there are many businesses, such as restaurants, that go into the night, which draw people parking, and we don't enforce parking. And in San Francisco, they've recognized this and wanted to change those requirements. So that's something, I don't want to change that now, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so with regard to things that I do think we ought to change, and so I want to take a little bit of a straw poll on one of these things, and I've brought this up before, and maybe I don't have any support for this, but currently we're asking that parking be unbundled for rental units only and not for condominiums. I don't see why that would be. I think I would rather have unbundled parking for any units, be they rental or a purchased unit. So I'll put that out to the commission to see if there's anyone who wants to comment whether they would be in favor of that. I do think that, Clay Larson actually had some very good comments and wrote a good email about some of these issues with some of the language, and I think we should change that. The language about the transit passes does say 1 monthly Clipper card and/or AC Transit Easy Pass. I think AC Transit Easy Pass is a known quantity, but I don't think there is anything such as a monthly Clipper card, because a Clipper can be used for BART, it can be used for a number of transit agencies, and they all have different ways of, and I don't think BART has a monthly pass. So I think that we need to clarify exactly what we mean there, that language is too vague to be enforceable. And I do think that one thing I'd like to clarify, we took out information about Measure D that talks about the studying of Measure D, because we did actually pass a ballot measure that eliminated the parking requirements in Measure D. So I would just ask that we add there is no language in there that says that that we had a ballot measure and it passed. The language just kind of stops and says, we're considering doing this, and it doesn't say that we did it. So if we could just add that language, I think that would be important for anyone reading that document in the future. And I can show you where I think we should add that if you have a question about that. I can get back to that in a second. And I also agree with Clay Larson that the language that says that ensure that adequate but not excessive off-street parking facilities for vehicles and bicycles are provided, ... et cetera, is too vague and should be stricken, because adequate is completely a subjective word, and I don't think it's appropriate. I just don't think it would be appropriate to leave that in. So let's see, I think, so those last 4 items, unbundled parking, adding a note about Measure D that we actually did pass a ballot measure that removed those parking requirements, removing the ensure that adequate, blah, 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 parking facilities, remove that language, and somehow doing something with the monthly Clipper card language. Those are 4 things that I think would be important to change. So do commissioners have any comments about those items? Commissioner McLeod?
Sure. Well, I would support unbundling to all new dwellings. Condos, it's not included for condos to unbundle parking?
Say again?
I didn't realize that was not. I thought we were unbundling everything.
No, it's just only rental.
Oh, well, I would support extending that to condominium development. I mean, if we have a 0.5 maximum across half the city, and so there won't be more, I mean, I think it would allow developers to let the people who want to pay for it have the parking if it's unbundled. I think that's actually more flexibility.
If I could address the commission on this one, it has nothing to do with the merits of it. It's the nuances and the complexity of envisioning a real estate transaction where you've got a bank that's giving you a mortgage, and you've got 2 different pieces of property that you've got the condo that you're buying, and that's going to have to be financed, and you're purchasing a parking space in a garage, presumably, that you're buying, and just how if those become disconnected, if you can't sell the parking, you own the condo and the parking space, but you can't sell the parking space, I mean, just how all that works out in the course of a real estate transaction is where I kind of got stuck with this.
Well, my understanding is this is in certain cities, this is done, that people purchase their parking space separately and perhaps sell it separately from their residence.
I mean, maybe to just jump in on this, I mean, I think the point is that you as the buyer can choose to buy the unit with or without parking. And so if you're choosing to buy the unit with parking, then that gets packaged. That gets bundled at that time because that's your request. But if you were to, walk through the units and say, I'll take unit 101, but I don't want any parking, then you're not obligated to take the parking when you won't use it. So I think there are ways to say that, but not have it affect the real estate transaction. As far as I know, I know in San Francisco, it's unbundled, and I haven't heard of any issues of people having to do two separate mortgages for the parking and for that. Because I agree with you, if people had to do two separate mortgages to buy their parking spot in their unit, that would be a little ridiculous and difficult. But I think that's, in practicality, how it often happens is it's that the sale option is not mandated as a bundle, but you can choose your bundle or to unbundle.
Okay.
But I think, maybe leave it up to let you guys work through that, maybe with city attorneys and folks, but the principle being that the buyer has the choice, but they're able to package it together for a mortgage, and whatever semantics need to be legalese drafted.
We can draft the changes so it's included, and if it doesn't work, we'll bring it back to you.
Okay, and does that mean you would be in favor of that then?
Yeah, I mean, I think a buyer should be able to choose whether they buy parking or don't buy parking.
Okay, all right, so I'm seeing, I'm hearing at least three supports, three people supporting that. Any comments about the other changes?
Well, regarding the transportation demand management program, it was my understanding that we were simply extending what we have existing on the books from the San Pablo Avenue corridor to the rest of the city, and that we would revisit the whole transportation demand management program at a future time when we could really debate that and the merits of adding certain things and requiring more things. So that was my understanding, that we would look at that in the future.
Okay.
Because I think it takes a lot more thought than just saying, oh, we need a couple more, we need a minimum dollar amount on a Clipper card, or, because there are other elements to it. I mean, I'm all for upgrading it with the goal of, encouraging transit-oriented development all across the city, but I think we need to study it a little more than just kind of doing it ad hoc tonight.
Sure,
that would be my thinking on that issue.
Okay, yeah, I think we do have to address it, because a monthly Clipper card does not exist. There is no such thing. So a developer providing a monthly Clipper card could provide an empty Clipper card, it seems, and get out of that requirement is my concern.
If I may, so on this one, the AC Transit Pass is $84.60 a month right now. We could edit this to make it the AC Transit Pass or equivalent dollar amount. I'm not saying this
Per month,
particularly.
at least in the short run, get something in there with a little more specificity.
Seems reasonable.
Dollar value per month, yeah. Should have a dollar value per month, for sure.
Yeah, we had, I think, discussed this topic when we were discussing San Pablo Avenue specific plan, and at that time we were also wondering, what happens if the card is for a 3-bedroom unit. You can't compare, a transit card for a 3-bedroom unit and a studio, because studio occupant would be just one person using that. But in a 3-bedroom unit, there will be 3 people who would need, who either depend on car or some transit mode. So in that case, how do you, have an equity or really, serve that purpose of providing transit option so that they don't rely on car?
Yeah, I actually, I pulled this out of the staff, pulled this out of the language, so I'm not sure if it does it reference number of bedrooms or just the number, or just it's per unit?
It's just a unit.
It's per unit?
One per unit.
Yeah, one per unit, yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's also an issue. So we could decide to maybe just come back to this one, since it is, as you point out, perhaps more complicated than we want to work out on the dais tonight, or we could accept the simple solution of just saying AC Transit, Easy Pass, or equivalent for now, and come back to it later.
Or could the whole TDM could be, looked at holistically as
Yeah.
Commissioner McNamara?
Okay.
I would be more inclined to push out the TDM rather than putting some sort of haphazard solution in.
Okay.
Rather just maybe strike that from the proposal and we can come back to a larger conversation citywide about TDM once we have universal parking controls in place.
I'd be okay with that, yeah. Okay.
And we should also include curb management, like car share parking locations, loading and unloading bays for, or pickup spots for car hailing, like Uber and Lyft, and also locations for accessible loading bays.
Yeah, when we do TDM, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, it can include car share, on-site car share. There's a lot of other options.
Exactly, yeah.
And one other corollary would be upgrading the bicycle ordinance, parking ordinance, which we said we would do in the future, but I think that's all part and parcel of transportation demand management, even though it would be separate from that. But it is creating a more multimodal transit environment.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we could, that there's support for striking this transit pass for now, and coming back to it later.
The transit passes, it's the only requirement we have right now for a TDM, right?
It's the only objective requirement right now.
Okay. I mean, there are other programs that will analyze trip data and potential trip usage that could be required for new construction as well.
Right. Well, I think we all agree that we should come back to
Yeah.
TDM. My question is just, should we strike this language for now or change it? Because maybe we should just leave it in for now. And I'm fine with that as well, since I don't want to have a big discussion necessarily at the dais about this.
I guess
but I do think it needs revision at some point.
Well, I would support it, but I think we should move on new TDM fairly
Sure.
quickly then.
Sure, but that wouldn't be part of the resolution for tonight, but yeah,
No,
I
okay.
agree, yeah. Okay, so maybe we just, to make it easy, just leave that one in for now, and we'll come back to it later. But I'm heartened that my fellow commissioners realize that we need more depth on that one. Is anyone, are people supportive of removing the sentence that says ensure that adequate, et cetera, since adequate is a very subjective term? Not seeing huge rally behind that one.
I mean,
Okay.
where it does get translated into specificity is in the actual numbers.
Okay.
So in a way, it is generic.
Okay.
I don't know how to make it more specific, except see the numbers.
Okay, so what you're saying is that is a generic, or that isn't a
I mean, adequate.
subjective statement, but we have all the rest of the objective things in the language.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's fine.
saying adequate parking, and you see it in a lot of the correspondence that a lot of people say there isn't adequate parking. A lot of people say there is adequate parking.
Subjective.
I mean, we don't have a definition of
Exactly.
adequate parking. But, I mean, if staff could come up with a definition of adequate parking, then we could go with it.
I'm fine leaving it in.
I don't have one
and-
off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm happy with that too. We'll just leave it in, it sounds like. And then finally, I just want to find that, if I can find it quickly, the language that references Measure D, because there is just an abrupt stop.
If you're looking at the general plan attachment, I believe it's on the page that's numbered within the document of 4-30.
Thank you very
And
much.
so that's where we tried to make a change to this version based on the comment last time, and so maybe we didn't do that accurately, but on the left margin of 4-30.
Yeah, so, okay, so let's see. Okay, so if you look at page 4-30, thank you for finding that. The first paragraph mentioned that a working group was created. The second paragraph mentions details about that working group. And then that's it. Right? It doesn't mention that any ballot measure passed that actually removed the parking requirements. I believe that's correct.
Yeah. I think you're correct. If you'd like, I can bring it up on the screen in just a moment. Oops.
I mean, the language is not incorrect, but I just think it'd be helpful for those looking at this later to have that context.
So how about if we add a paragraph in this location that explains that essentially the narrative that has been drafted in the box on the side.
The idea is that narrative would be added. That's the amendment to clarify that Measure D was approved. And
Oh, yeah, you actually have that in the comment. Yeah, what's in the comment would be perfect for me, so if.
Right, so that this is actually intending to amend the general plan to make that statement. All of the comments are amendments to the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I misunderstood because I know that part of the staff report said that there are some things that are just comments and some things that are amendments, but perhaps I misunderstood. If that is actually, if what's in blue text in the red box is meant to be a replacement for that paragraph that it's next to, then I'm good.
That's right. So we'll make sure that's more clear for the next iteration, but that's
okay, that my bad. Yeah, because what I understood is that well, actually, okay, no, I think what the staff report said, just so I'm not crazy, is that if it was in line, which like the last paragraph on that page is, that it was an amendment. But the staff report said things to the left were just comments.
Okay.
So yeah, if we make that comment an actual inline, then we're good. Yeah, okay.
Maybe with that, if I can go ahead and then just make a motion, so we do have another item after this, and it's getting a little late for some of us.
Yeah, I think we've
I'll make a
covered
motion to move item 7-4, recommending that the commission approve resolution 2023-02 and resolution 2023-03, recommending to the council approval of amendments to the transportation element of the general plan and amendments to chapters 20.20 and 20.28 of the zoning ordinance to modify off-street parking requirements.
Okay, and so do you?
With the amendment to unbundle parking for sale and rental projects.
Okay, and the language change that we just discussed, should we make that part of the resolution or not?
I don't think it's necessary. I think they got the point. I think it's kind of already in there.
Got it. All right, I'm good with that.
So that's my motion.
All right, we have a motion.
I second.
And we have a second.
Yes, sir.
So I will poll the council. Commissioner Moman.
Yes.
Commissioner Waddy.
Aye.
Commissioner Hudson.
Aye.
Commissioner McLeod.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So thank you for everyone who sent in comments on this item and everyone who came to listen and participate in this. And thanks once again to staff and consultants and commissioners. That concludes I think all of our items 7, which is action items. Now we have new business, item 8. The one item is, under 8, is planning application 23-021, a study session for the new residential units at 925 Adams Street. Staff, please.
Yes, and thank you to our applicants for their patience this evening. They've probably learned a lot about parking.
They wanted to know.
I'd like to introduce to you Sophie Scheinbaum-Gable. She is, or Gable, whatever, I'm sorry. Sophie. She has been working behind the scenes for us for the last number of months. She has a background as a professional planner working with the city of LA and a local consulting firm. She's back at graduate school at Cal and has been preparing some of your staff reports over the last few months. She's with us this summer full-time to help on some of the important initiatives and processing of applications. So I'd like Sophie to make a presentation to you tonight on the first project that is utilizing our San Pablo Avenue specific plan.
I just want to say two things. One, welcome, and I just want to ask the commission if we're okay to proceed past 9:30. If we, sometimes we take a vote about that, or we could just continue with by acclamation. Are there any objections to continuing past 9:30? Okay, no objections. So, Sophie, please go ahead.
All right, just give me a minute here. I need to pull up the slides. Thank you.
And if you're taking a moment, I'm just going to run out and get some water real quick.
You know what, I'll do it here. It'll probably be a little faster. That's right. That's part of what we're doing here. So this is... Is it? Okay, so here, whoops, I will share the screen. Here. There it goes.
All right, good evening, commissioners. So this is a reminder, this is for planning application 2321 for 925 Adams. And a reminder that, as Nick mentioned, as Commissioner Pilch mentioned, this is a study session, so this is an opportunity to give preliminary feedback to both staff and the applicant prior to a more formal approval hearing in the future. So some background, the site is 5,000 square feet with a existing commercial building that's a little less than 2,000 square feet. The proposed project is an initial design review for conversion of the existing commercial building and construction of 2 new residential units with a mix of 1 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, an additional 3-bedroom, 4-bathroom, and then unit 3 is the conversion of that commercial building for a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom. All 3, this would total just over 5,000 square feet with all units, with a maximum height of 32 feet 11 inches and a floor area ratio of 103%. And just a note that there's an anticipated future condo conversion application that would be submitted after the design review approval process and building permit process. So just a quick context overview. As you can see on the site plan, Adams Street is over on the left side. The unit 3 in the back, again, that's the existing commercial building that would be converted, and the additional 2 units at the front of the property. And just another context picture, or sorry, elevation, just showing the proposed building in context of the existing developments on the street. So we received two correspondences in the last few days from nearby residents expressing concerns about a few different items. First is density and proximity to the single-family homes, both directly adjacent to the project and on the street surrounding it. The overall lot coverage proposed, the project design and just scale of the project overall, as well as concerns about the roof decks proposed and privacy concerns related to those. A specific concern about construction disruption for some existing trees. I think specifically there's an oak tree near the front of the property on the south property line, as well as potential sunlight obstruction. So this is the first project that's going to be processed under the adapted specific plan for San Pablo Avenue. And just a reminder that in addition to zoning changes, the specific plan has a different set of design guidelines and objective standards. I've outlined some of the applicable policies in the staff report, but again, this is a departure from the typical residential design guidelines that are the citywide that are usually assessed by this commission, and it's a separate, more objective set. And a reminder that, the overall intent of the specific plan is to increase residential density while still maintaining that quality design. Just a brief overview of sort of the key differences for the zoning for the specific plan area for this site. So sort of we have here the sort of top development standards of consideration, and then citywide R3 zoning that would typically have been seen on this site, and now with the implemented specific plan, what changes there are. So firstly, the most significant is a change in floor area ratio. Previously, the site would have been at a 55% FAR, now a 1.5 or 150% FAR, and then for projects that exceed or at least double the minimum open space requirement, can go up to 1.75. Lot coverage, 50% across, although there is the discretion of this commission to allow up to 70% through the design review process. Building height increases from 28 to 35 feet. And then for density, no minimums, but previously there was a 63 unit per acre maximum, and now an unlimited density, although obviously that's limited just by the development standards. Oops. So just for this evening, just some areas of consideration that staff has laid out for discussion. Firstly is the unit separation, just overall site layout. Units 1 and 2, we can always go back to the site plan if you'd like to take a closer look, but units 1 and 2 are only 4 feet apart. We do allow, that is permissible. It does require some additional, building and fire code requirements to be met, but just a consideration of whether we want to encourage consolidation of those those units in order to maximize either density or floor area. Sort of related to that, thinking about the intent of the specific plan, the proposed unit density is only 3 units for this lot. Under the previous 63 units per acre, this lot could have up to 7 units, so another just consideration for discussion. And additionally, the specific plan lays out requirements for protected bicycle parking, but doesn't have necessarily specific specs or sort of descriptions of how that should be met. The applicant has proposed bicycle parking to be combined in a protected shelter on the side yard, but just looking for maybe some additional guidance or discussion on some specific feedback for that item. And similarly, another sort of more detailed consideration is just about trash enclosures, both for location and sort of orientation of those on the site. So staff recommends that the commission review the proposed project, and again, just provide preliminary feedback for the applicant and for staff, focusing first on the areas of consideration outlined in the staff report, and then, of course, expanding to other topics as needed. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do we have questions from the commissioners? No questions from Commissioner Wadi.
Yeah, I have just one question.
Commissioner Momin.
Yeah. I have first question to the staff. When we measure the height, does it include the roof penthouse or anything?
Are you referring to the parapet around the roof
parapet,
deck?
yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but I can look into that and let you know.
Or a penthouse, this, all 3 units have roof access with a hatch, through a hatch. So just wondering, they have designed it in a certain way, which is their choice, but I just wanted to know if that has been constrained by the height limitation.
Is that something you'd like the applicants to speak to?
No,
or- okay,
I just
staff.
want to know first what is the code for measurement of the height?
It's typically to the top of the parapet, as though you're dropping a tape measure from the top of the parapet down to the ground.
So if there is a penthouse, a staircase enclosure on top of the roof, that would be considered for the building height.
There can be, I might need to double check my memory of the code, but I think up to 10% of the roof area can be for access or mechanical equipment that can exceed the parapet height. But generally speaking, it's from the parapet height.
Okay. Yeah, and my question is to the applicant. Just wanted to understand your rationale for having the gap between the 2 units, unit 1 and 2.
You can come to the podium and answer that if you'd like.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
That's a good idea, yeah. Did you have a presentation you wanted to do for us tonight? Or if not, that's fine, but it'd be great if you could answer questions.
Yeah, I can definitely answer questions. I can give you a quick just overview of kind of how we came to this site plan, if that would help.
Sure, that'd be great.
And maybe that can kind of address some of the questions as well. I know the kind of the big thing for us was we did play around with different massings and figured out like how many units we could do. We landed on 3 because it basically allowed us to keep kind of a garden. I'm a landscape architect, number one, and I love landscape. And so the idea was to kind of make this as kind of green and not just like a single building on top of there. And so we figured, and we also like the idea of keeping the existing building just so we didn't have to tear something down just to build it back up. And so we ended up with 3 because that's kind of the most we could fit. We did decide to split the 2 front units because we did play around with having a massive building in front and it just didn't feel right for the site. The 2 buildings kind of allowed us to kind of push and pull a little bit and create a little more diversity of buildings in there. Because we did that though, we only had, our buildings are 18 feet wide, which is really hard to fit enough, a staircase and then different uses. So instead of doing 5 feet, which would have made a lot more sense in terms of like building construction, we went to 4 feet because we figure you can still maintain everything in there and then have access to it. We did, as part of the project, we are moving the curb cut from one side of the site to the other, and that was so we could set back the buildings as far as possible from that oak tree that's existing. We also, our driveway does go down that area.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. Your voice is kind of low. If you can move the phone closer, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem. That's probably better. And then with that, we also have the driveway is all permeable, so like that, we're doing everything we can to kind of maintain the health of that oak. And then just the question on the height of the parapet, the 3211 was to actually the access hatch there. Other than that, just the idea, like the landscape, the last thing was privacy. We did lay out the windows in a way that, the windows that are looking onto the neighbors' properties are generally in bedrooms, and all of the bedroom windows that are there are mostly above beds and are high, so that you don't have views down in. And with the roof decks, I've been up on the building, on the existing building right there, and when you're up on top, and that's a 2-story building, and when you're up on top of there, you kind of look out over everything. And so once you're on that 3rd story, the idea would be that you're basically looking out over, you're not looking down in. And then when you're on the 3rd story, that even kind of heightens that. So you're looking kind of up and over and not down into the neighbors' lots as much as possible. I think that pretty much describes our overall thought.
Okay, thank you. And did that answer your question, Commissioner Moman? About that? Okay, thank you. And you can stay there for a moment in case there's other questions. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner McLeod, did you have any?
Not right now, no.
Okay, and so I did have a question about the covered bicycle parking that staff brought up. I searched the plan and I'm not able to see that called out in the plan, but you did call it out in the staff report. So can you, can either the applicant or staff tell me where that's located so I can find it on the plan?
It's on the, if you have the most recent plan, it's on the cover sheet. It's next to, it's basically across from Unit 3 where that car is shown. It's that little, I think it's also on, it's labeled on sheet, the site plan, which is A0.2. In both those areas. So the open parking, it's right to the south of that.
Yeah, I guess I don't
If that makes
see it.
sense.
Could we pull up the site plan, please?
We're pulling up the site plan now.
Oh, we don't have that version.
Yeah, we don't have that version, in our
Yes.
packet, so I think that must.
So, those are rather small rectangles, 3, are they meant to be vertical, where you lift your bike?
Yeah, they would be like kind of pop up and then on a hook is what we were thinking.
Do you have any provisions for cargo bikes?
Probably not in this version of it, just because the height would be so tall.
Well, it won't work for that kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, okay, that was my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can come back to that point in deliberation, but yeah, thank you. All right, I'm glad we found that version of the plan. And no further questions for me then. Any last questions from commissioners? Okay, thank you for answering questions. Now we'll go to public comment and see if there's any member of the public who wants to speak on this item. Is there anyone in the audience here who would like to speak? Go ahead, please come to the microphone.
Hello, can you hear me just fine? All right, thank you very much. Good evening, Commission Council. I speak as one of the resident members on this block, and I want to speak about some of the concerns that have been addressed, as well as the concerns that we have personally have had talking to amongst ourselves. One of which is, as mentioned previously, the trees. One of the trees on the street side was invested by a lot of the members of the neighborhood in order to increase the beautification and the aesthetics of the block. And while it was not much of a tree to speak of, it does represent one of our efforts in order to beautify our neighborhood. And we have concerns about the development of the curbside that may affect this tree. And in addition to the tree that is under the purview of 929, the large oak tree has been sort of a staple of our neighborhood for a long period of time. And with the planned development, it seems that it will encroach very much so on it, which may leave them unable to keep it safely stable and perhaps in the future have to, unfortunately, cut it down. So those are some of the 2 tree concerns that we have. But one of the other ones is in regarding to how currently close their current structure is. One of the things that if you could see it from the public, on the southeast wall, there is a lot of water damage, and if you notice, it perhaps may spill over into the property lines of 919. So while we're not quite clear on what this sort of may cross in terms of codes and regulations, we do have concerns about what this planned development, which may increase the density size of this area, how this may concern both 919 and 929 in the future. And then finally, in regards to some of the parking we've been talking about quite a lot over this night, this will drastically increase the number of residents in the area. And to be quite honest, a lot of us do still struggle with trying to find parking, and this will only exacerbate and aggravate the problem. And as residents that live in this neighborhood, we just have lots of concerns about all of these issues that may crop up in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the audience here from the public who wanted to speak? Not seeing any. Are there any? This would be the time for members of the public who are online to raise their virtual hand if they want to speak on this item.
I have one hand raised. Chanel, please go ahead.
Hi, hello, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, yes. I am another resident of 919, and I do want to reiterate that we all have like the similar concerns, and that that we were unaware that this portion of our street was actually under the San Pablo plan. We were under the impression that the San Pablo plan did not extend to the residential side of Adams, and kind of consider just like how much that sort of density makes sense on a major road, but Adams is a quite small residential street, and so we understand that the limits described, the the features of the units, proposed units described do fall under San Pablo plan, but do not fall under the usual residential zoning ordinances. And it seems like it's incongruent to the rest of the neighborhood. And I understand that they've tried to kind of address some of the privacy concerns, but it's, as you can tell by the plan, the proximity of the proposed units and the current housing that's in the street is still quite small, and I don't believe that should be completely brushed away. Thank you so much. That will be all.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other online hands?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay, there's one more member of the public here who would like to speak. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Vinay Chivrit. I live in 919, and my house one story in the front. We plan to put solar panel on the roof, and the new one is higher than normal. So it blocked my sunlight. How can you protect? You said don't sunlight disturb, but it disturbed me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can you say your address again?
919 next to
919.
the new project.
919, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. I think we don't have any more members of the public, so we can close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Sounded like you had another question, Commissioner McLeod?
Well, I guess the tree is, I'm trying to figure this out. It's on the neighbor's property, the big oak tree. I see a big circle.
It's got a big trunk, so I think it straddles both property lines according to the survey. Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, when you say straddles the property, you mean it's on the, kind of on the property line?
Yeah, it sits on the property line.
Oh, okay, thank you.
so it's everyone's intention to preserve this tree, correct?
Yeah, the buildings were put there. Yeah, that's the site layout dictated preserving that tree.
Right. So have you consulted an arborist about how best to work around the root area?
I'm a landscape architect. I have an arborist on site or on staff, so we've discussed it a bit. I mean, we can get another arborist if that's necessary.
Well, due to conflict of interest, it might be good to have somebody else do it so that, you know, I mean, that might be my suggestion, would be have an arborist give you guidelines. I mean, you certainly would know how to implement them, but I mean, you know, there's concern about compaction of roots when construction equipment is driving over that area, how to protect it during construction, excavation nearby. I don't know how deep those roots go or how surface, how close they are to the surface, but that would be one recommendation I would make. Would be
yes, sounds good.
In that regard, we do have some standards standard conditions of approval that include tree protection measures. And for a situation like this, I had to ask our city arborist to review that, make some if there are any refinements that needed to be done before bringing back to you a final plan for approval. And then, you know, just keeping an eye on it during construction, making sure that materials aren't stored underneath it that have an impact on the roots and so on and so forth.
right. You could have a set of guidelines. Yeah. Yeah, that was my first question. And then I'm a little confused. 919 is across the street. I was going to.
It's right. It's right next door. It's on the north side.
Why am I? Bear with me a moment. Because I'm looking at your lot on the site survey, and I see 929 Adams. And I see 923 Adams.
Would it help if I brought up a Google Street View?
Yeah, I think so.
I think the problem is the survey says 923 Adams, and that's actually 919.
Okay, well that would
an error.
explain it. Surveyors are not supposed to make that kind of mistake.
I know, I'll talk to you about that.
So on the screen is a slightly dated street view. The residence on the left is 919. It's currently there's a second-story addition currently underway.
At 929.
919.
919.
On the left.
919.
929 is behind the oak tree,
Okay,
and this is the subject property right in the middle.
yeah. And so there's an addition going on,
Yes, that's now, it's been framed, at least framed out as a second-story addition.
and that's going to raise the roof level for the solar panels? Is that happening? Or the solar panels are going to go on the second story? I guess it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like trying to understand the impacts here.
We put the solar here, and the building is already higher than normal.
I think the question is, if there's a second-story addition, are the panels going on the second story or the first story? First story, okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your clarification.
Well, I'll let somebody else make comments
Okay.
about this a little bit.
Okay. Let's see, did I have a question? Did we, and I'm sorry if I just missed this, there was a question, comment from staff about the 4-foot separation between buildings. Did you address that previously in your comments? And if so, I apologize because I didn't hear it.
Yeah, no, I think the big thing was that just wanting to separate the two buildings just to have some differentiation with the buildings, make it not just one big mass. And then the 4 feet was basically because we have as of right now, it's an 18-foot wide building, and even going down to 17.6 made this having a stairway, a hallway, and then some usable space really difficult. So that 6 inches was critically important to kind of having the whole layout of the interior work. And that was kind of worth it for when looking at everything, even though the additional cost it's going to be to build those firewalls all the way up. And we don't really have, we just have some windows on those two sides for just light wells. So those won't be able to be operable, but that was a fair trade-off for that extra 6 feet of room in both buildings.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. All right, would anyone like to start comments and deliberation? Commissioner Wadi?
Sure. I'll be candid. I'm definitely starting to fade here, so I'm going to keep it short. I would say I have two primary comments to provide on this. The first being, I do really feel like there needs to be some sort of residential entrance facing the street. And whether that's done directly on the first building where there's a clear entrance porch, sort of celebrated residential entrance in some way on the building itself, or if you're having this be more of sort of that compound-like feel where you kind of, find buildings as you kind of explore back through a garden, you're saying, and I can kind of picture how that you could make a really beautiful garden, then I think you could accommodate that through some sort of, really intentional, archway entrance, something that really feels like it says this is where residents and visitors should walk, versus right now it feels a little bit like there's a car driveway, and then there's like a sort of blank secondary wall. Right. And so I kind of feel like we're missing the boat a little bit on like, where's the entrance for people and where do we go? And again, I think there's multiple ways to solve that design issue. But that's one thing that I would be looking for, is just a more clear, direct, and sort of celebrated residential entry, and sort of that place where you see where you're going. So it's not also like turning its back to the street. I either think like it needs to obviously face the street, or there needs to be sort of that like secret garden entrance, that's facing the street, one of the two. So that's my one comment. And then the second comment is just right now the second building in, the cantilevered portion feels a little awkward. And just like a little bit like you just needed more square footage and it got tacked on. It doesn't feel overly intentional as part of the design composition. Again, not here to maybe give design solutions on that, but just to sort of highlight that that kind of sticks out to me. I understand why you're doing that in terms of how the building footprints, and I like sort of the concept of, you know, having 3 detached single-family homes. I think it's actually a great way to do sort of incremental densification in Albany while sort of keeping the single-family vibe in Albany. So I don't have an issue with that sort of design intention. I presume the side setback on the side is because there's a code requirement. I almost wish there wasn't, so you could get that sort of alignment on the left-hand side there. But where the cantilever is on the right-hand side, I think it's cantilevered or over the, couldn't quite tell if the trellis, if it attached to the trellis in any way or where that was proportionally on the lot. But it feels a little bit of an appendage. And so I would just ask you to take a second look at that and really think that through, and whether that's ultimately the right design solution, or if there's a different way you can play with staggering the masses or bringing that mass all the way down to grade. You know, it seems like you probably still have enough room for a drive aisle to the right of it if you did take that to the grade. There's sort of something that's just like lacking in the grounding of that, the way it's projecting out. It's sort of like a little bit bigger than a bay window, but not quite. So that was just sort of those were the 2 things that kind of jumped out at me. Aside from that, though, I mean, I think the design intention, I think your materials, you're using good quality materials. I don't have a concern of the height, particularly given that the adjacent neighbor is doing is basically having a comparably sized building, and then the building even further, the apartment building. There's clearly a pattern of buildings of this scale, and again, this was our intent of the San Pablo Avenue plan, was to increase density. So I think with a couple of those adjustments, those would be my primary recommendations. And then obviously what I would say is I always think it's good to play nicely with your neighbors. And if there was a tree that was planted on one side, it's really special to the neighborhood, you know, maybe you guys at your cost can help to relocate that same tree to the opposite side so they still feel like their efforts were not in vain, and swapped over, or some sort of efforts collaborating with the neighbors on sort of the landscaping and beautification efforts, which it sounds like is very much in the design intent, just probably not quite there yet in terms of design details. So those are my only comments. I'll hold it there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Before I go to another comment, I just want to point out that in the plan, or maybe ask a question to staff, in the plan A-0.3, it shows the 911 with 919 Adams with the addition. Is that correct? So that's what's in Street View is not correct, but you see where I've.
Yeah, the site elevation on A-0.3 reflects the currently under construction second story addition on 919.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. All right. Who else would like to comment? Commissioner Moment, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so overall, you know, I kind of liked the site plan idea of having vehicular approach on one side and having the 2 units on one. And the courtyard and the parking in front of the unit 3, I think it's kind of a nice arrangement. You have taken advantage of the existing building and created a large open space in front of that. I also kind of like your initial approach of unit interior planning of that unit. What I did not like a lot is a really nice yard along the street and the nice trellis, like avoiding a dead wall. There is not much interaction between that front courtyard and the building.
Right. Oh, yeah. The permeability between those 2 spaces.
Right. Yeah, it's a nice courtyard, and I also like that feature of the trellis there. It would create nice character along the street, but there is no interaction between the building and that space. I don't know like how you would approach that and who would use that, and there is that wall is basically blank, so
right.
There would not be circulation through that space. So that is one thing that kind of stands out immediately. Second is I'm not really very convinced by the gap you have between the two units. I understand you want them to be structurally independent, but you are kind of compromising with the space for the third unit on the side where you have 2 bedrooms on the upper floor. You just have like 5 feet there. So I think if you consider closing that gap and have just like 2 twin units with a common wall, or if you want them structurally independent, you could still have like a not party wall but 2 walls with little gap that could be closed, and that would allow more space on the east side. I think that's east side between unit 2 and unit 3, and that I think would give a nicer open feeling for the whole area. And then third is, I'm not sure if you have enough turning radius for the cars to turn in garage. Have you checked that?
If the garages right now are kind of at the minimum, so I mean, you're not fitting a big giant car in here. I mean, I'm imagining these units will be more for somebody who has a smaller electric car that the reason they use the garage is to go plug it in at night. But we are right at this is the smallest garage that is allowable.
Yeah, but I'm just concerned that,
getting in and out. Yeah, that's
out might be really tough.
Yeah.
Even for a
small
average car. Yeah, and also that you have posts for the projection above, that might further constrain the movement of maneuvering of the cars. So yeah, something to look at.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And also, coming back to my second point about the yard and interaction with the building, you have entrances on just one side. I think it would be good to have something to look at when you walk along the street, some kind of active element there. You can rework your layout of the unit on ground level and have maybe an entrance going from the street. And that could, I think, activate the space. Yeah, so those are my suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Moman. Commissioner Hudson?
No comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner McLeod. Did you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little. Can you pull up the elevations? I guess the plan. Oh, sorry. Could you pull up the plans, please? And we could look at page. Sorry, the elevations, proposed elevations, A 3.1 to start. Yeah, I guess just to start, I mean, the whole idea of our San Pablo plan was to increase density, is to increase density along this corridor. So, in that sense, we want to encourage you to do what you're doing, and it would actually be good to have more units if it were possible. My first inclination would be to get rid of the gap. I mean, as a designer, I just don't think it serves any purpose. You're trying to create a little daylight slot or something, but I think that's going to be a really unpleasant, unused, not enjoyable space to be in. So it's kind of just like, to me, a wasted space, completely wasted space. I mean, maybe put a couple of bikes in there if you could lock them and get to them. But otherwise, I just see it having no value. And I think it's more expensive for your project. You got 2 exterior walls where you could combine them, and you could reduce the energy usage of the building by, almost a third, I think, with a party wall. So from an energy use point of view, it's really ill-advised to have that separation. Multifamily construction is much more energy efficient when it's joined together. And then I don't really like the parapet all the way around, especially you could at least pull that back from the neighbor's side at 919, allow a little more daylight. It doesn't need to be all the way to the very edge. could be pulled back. I think you need to relabel your elevations for orientation.
Yeah, it might be landscapes.
You know, and I agree with, you know, Commissioner Waddy. I don't really like the shape of that big bump out. It just seems really kind of awkward to me. And then I think it's so big, you're probably going to, I don't know, the idea is that the trellis structure is a support structure, but those are going to make it really hard to pull into your car parking garage. You know, and I just find there's a lot of inconsistency in the elevations. You know, I don't quite get the design logic between all the elevations I'm looking at. I just see kind of a random placement of windows. I mean, the ones in the bottom make a little more sense, but I would give more thought to how you're orienting and sizing and placing windows. And
A lot of that.
You know, I kind of agree with Commissioner Waddy. It seems like the street side, and also with Commissioner Moment's comment, the street side seems a little unwelcoming in the sense of you got the ground floor, one window, which is the open space for that unit, but it's not, you know, I think you mentioned permeability. I would agree with that. It could be much more permeable. So I think there's some improvements to be made. I like the idea of adaptive reuse of the back building. I think that's a great way to approach it. I mean, you could still potentially keep it and even build over it. You could make one long building. I mean, there are a lot of ways to go here. But you know, adaptive reuse is a great way to conserve resources and reduce the carbon footprint of the building. So, you know, I don't have any other comments about I think the back unit is pretty successful in terms of how it's laid out and what it can be. So the other thing is that I would, you know, we're trying to promote transit-oriented development, you know, different ways of getting around, lessen our car dependence. So I think getting a much more convenient and accessible and usable bike storage system would be great. And I think you should have space for cargo bikes. I mean, I think that's the way of the future, is people getting around on cargo bikes and doing everything around town via cargo bike. You know, I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah, obviously the zero lot limit walls have to be no windows. And I'm okay with roof decks. I love roof decks. I think they're a great way to create a little more open space for your project. But yeah, I think the elevations need some work, and well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Hudson, I think, didn't have comments at this time. So I will make my comments now. I'm thrilled that the San Pablo Avenue specific plan is being put into use. That's great. And I agree that more units would be great, but I think this is a great improvement already for this parcel, which is really just a building in the back and nothing in the front except for car parking. So just a clarification about the car parking, actually. So there's 2 garages and 1 parking bay. Is that how to interpret the plan? Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Got it. So already this is above the requirements of zero minimum parking. So to those who commented about the difficulty in parking on the street, I just want to note that they're already providing on-site parking. I believe there will be requirements to plant street trees. It's part of our usual conditions of approval. And do our usual conditions of approval require protection of existing trees as well? Yes. I think they do. Yeah, okay, so that will be there. And And then as far as architectural comments, I can definitely support that the residential side, is needs work. Yeah, the street side is not usable and not a good use of that space. So I don't know how you would improve that or change that, but I agree with my fellow commissioners that that should be changed. And I don't really understand all the comments about the bump out and the parapets, but my fellow architects are probably right about that. Otherwise, I think the design is fine. I did appreciate my fellow commissioners' comment about the energy savings of having the shared wall. So that should be taken into consideration. But you'll do what you do. And finally, about the bike parking, yeah, that definitely needs to be improved. So instead of having the 3 stalls, you could, in order to accommodate longer bikes or bikes with trailers, you could just make that all one building, and then the bikes would have you could have the length to accommodate the longer bikes. But definitely, do a really good job on the bike parking, because it requires a lot less space than the car parking, so it deserves a really good treatment. I think that's it. The hour is late, so I'll stop there and see if there's any final comments from commissioners. Or did you have any clarifying questions about what we said at this point?
The bike parking part, it has to be enclosed? I'll.
Well, that's a good question. So I think what you've proposed right now is just a covered.
It's a covered area.
Okay.
Yes,
So do we have clarification about that?
So that's some of what we're asking the commission this evening, because the specific plan is as specific as protected. So it's open to some interpretation and discussion.
Okay, so in my mind, I'll make a comment and then hand it over to you, Commissioner McLeod. It should be enclosed, completely enclosed, so that it's lockable. And there's too much bike theft with bikes just left kind of out in the open like that. So that would be my preference.
Yeah, my understanding of the ordinance is that it's supposed to be protected from the weather and secure, meaning lockable. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would be our direction, unless my other commissioners think otherwise. Nope. Yeah, I think that's a consensus, so great.
I guess I would rethink the garage location on Unit 1. I mean, that's kind of your street side. There might be some way to redo that, so it's more living space on that edge.
This might not be the place to discuss this, but I played around a lot with where the garage goes and where the front door goes. And one of the reasons we have the garage on that side is because once you put the stairs in, if you don't go all the way up, then you get in you lose just a lot of space. And so by putting the garage on the street side, you basically allow yourself to have the second and third floor look out, like instead of having the staircase go up that side, you look out onto the street. But I think there is ways. We played around with that bottom bedroom opening out to the street with a door, and maybe we look back at that so that there is, because in reality that's probably going to be used as an office, and maybe then that opens out into that little courtyard patio area and activates the area. So I think there are things we can do to make that really work out. But it was really tough laying these buildings out.
Well, there are lots of ways to do stairways.
Yeah, I would say that having a stairway on the street side isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've seen treatments in single-family houses in this area where they have a nice window onto the stairway, and it can be a obscured window, but still provide much more, allow you to put a stairway there, but have it much more a better feeling. Okay. Well, I see that Commissioner Waddy's looking at the clock, so we better conclude. Thank you very much for your application, for coming. And this is just a study session, so we're not voting on anything tonight. And hopefully our comments were useful to you. So I will move on to the last item, which might just be announcement of the next meeting at 7 p.m. Oh, and I did want to say that I did forward an email to you, Jeff, about training, about some online training for planning commissioners. So if you could forward that on to the rest of the commissioners, that would be great, because it was a no-cost training. There's also a training that's held by the League of California Cities, which is also very nice, useful, multi-day training, which I can recommend. But that online online one seemed like a thing to jump on, since it was free and easily accessible. So with that, I'll say we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.